Today. So welcome, I'm Susan Clifford. I am the Immigrant and Refugee Health Program Manager here at the Orange County Health Department. My office is in this building. And part of my position is, can everybody hear me okay? Okay. Part of my position is facilitating a couple of coalitions, interagency coalitions, the Latino Health Coalition and the Refugee Health Coalition. And Lynn Salazar-Wadford, raise your hand, Lynn, at the back, is my co-chair, and I'm very thankful to her for all of her wonderful work and support and partnership this year. So just to give you a little bit of background, over the last year we've been looking for ways to increase kind of the knowledge and experience and growing of our coalition members, service providers around trauma and resilience, particularly with immigrant and refugee populations. And so that's kind of where this idea came from. We formed a subcommittee. Thank you to many of my subcommittee members over here. Fantastic. And they will introduce themselves shortly. And then we got an Orange County Health Department Innovation Grant to do this workshop or training today, as well as in 2 weeks in the same room we'll be doing a trauma-informed interpreter training for about 30 interpreters, and we already have a waiting list for that as well. So I'm very excited because I think we were able to offer this at a time that seems very timely in terms of trying to be supportive and recognize the strengths of our community members. And I appreciate y'all coming out today, especially early on this Friday morning. Before we get started, our group wanted to kind of acknowledge our own identities. Many of us presenting today are involved in racial equity work. And with that in mind, we wanted to openly acknowledge that we are not Latinx immigrants or refugees ourselves. At the same time, we also want to acknowledge that our presenters have had the honor of working in partnership with and learning from immigrant and refugee clients, colleagues, and leaders over many years. And we also continue to examine ourselves and our work with the goal of contributing in a positive way to immigrant and refugee health and equity for all. A few logistics before we get started as well. You'll see PowerPoint slides today. I'll send those out electronically afterwards, so you don't have to take notes unless you want to. I'll also send out a resource list that we've compiled from many of the different sources we'll be talking about. Links to those electronically so you can continue your studies or exploration afterwards. We've got an information table at the back with different information about local agencies. You can see we're videotaping today's presentation. Thank you, Kristen. So she is going to kindly put this up on the Health Department YouTube channel or link with a link to the PowerPoints afterwards, and I'll send that out as well so you can share that with colleagues maybe who weren't able to make it today.
Hi guys, good morning. So I just wanted to recognize some of our donors that assisted us with food, Orange County Health Department and Piedmont Health Services. And also you'll notice alongside your agenda and your other handouts, there are some post-it pads. Those you can use for questions. So how we propose to do it is while the presenter is presenting, if you have a question, scribble it down on your post-it pad. Susan and I will be manning the either side of the room. You could pass it down to the end and we'll grab the questions because we're so tight on time for entertaining questions. We want to try to get a jump on that and also compile any similar questions, and then we'll read some of the questions out loud during the breaks. Does that make sense? Yeah. All right. Thanks, guys.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Ennis Baker, and as you can see, I'm from El Futuro. Looking forward to talking with you more later this morning, but we wanted to find out who's here. So if you have coffee in your lap or anything else, you might want to put it down, so we're going to ask you to stand up to tell us who's here. So first of all, who of you are in a leadership role, administrative position in the county in some way? Please stand up. Welcome. We need you, power guys. We're glad you're here. Thank you. How about if you are somebody who works every day directly with one of the communities we're going to be talking about today? All right, oh, yay. So a few who don't work directly, yay. Again, we need you just as much as we need those power guys. Thank you, if not more. How many of you do home visiting routinely as a part of your work? Yay, I'm a home visitor, love home visitors, yay. Thank you. How about a health field, people who work in the health field? You get to decide how you define that, all right? Good, good, good. Nice. How about social workers? Yay, good. Giving you a little exercise, good on the quads, right? How about teachers or education folks, either early childhood or other? Thank you for being here. Woo. How about law enforcement? Any law enforcement folks? That's okay. That's all right. Get them here next time. Who did I leave out? Nonprofits in general in this community that are the network that holds us all together. Nonprofit folks. Woo! Nice. Nice. How about mental health professionals? A few of us. Yay! Yay. Who did I leave out, guys? Is there any group that I have not asked about? Students, thank you. Students, people who are learning in a classroom in some way. Yay, welcome, welcome. How about how many of you speak more than one language? Woo, can't survive without you guys. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And last but not least, how many of you feel comfortable standing and identify as a member of either the Latinx immigrant community or refugee, or people with refugee status? Let's have a round of applause for these guys. Thank you all for being here. And thank you everyone. We're looking forward to today and interacting with you as well as sharing information with you.
All right, so we're gonna, just before we get started with the main presentations, wanted to share a little bit of data to acknowledge kind of who we're talking about here in Latinx immigrants and refugees in Orange County. It's kind of tiny probably for those of you in the back, but again, you'll receive slides afterwards. So based on some anecdotal reports from different coalition members, we're estimating there are about 80 Congolese refugees from the Democratic Republic of Congo in Orange County. There are about 40 Syrian refugees. And on the right-hand side here is Burma or Myanmar, about 1,200 refugees in Orange County that include Burmese, Karen, Chin, Rohingya, and some other groups as well. And then in the middle you'll see kind of our largest immigrant group, the Latinx immigrant group being Mexican, Central American. We've noticed, at least in our clinics, quite an increase in our Central American population over this last year. Guatemalan, Salvadoran, and Honduran, and also Colombian immigrants. Of course, there are folks from other countries as well in Central and South America, but those are the main ones that we're seeing here in Orange County. Also sort of looking at the data with the American Community Survey, we see that in Orange County there are about 12%, 12 to 13% foreign-born population, about 8% Hispanic, and about 7% Asian, and our Asian community has also been growing over the last several years. And then just to kind of show one agency, again, the health department, and if you haven't done this in your own agencies, I encourage you to do so and to track kind of the trends and who you're serving and how it changes over time. About a third of our clients are LEP. Does anybody know what LEP is? Yes, limited English proficient. So somebody who would need to work with an interpreter in our services. And over 80 different countries of origin that we're serving just in our medical and dental clinics. And our top languages right now, as of this last fiscal year at the health department, are Spanish, Burmese and Karen, Mandarin Chinese, and then also some Arabic and Kinyarwanda being from the Congo, and some of our Syrian families speaking Arabic as well as from other countries. All right, so now we are going to be passing this over to start with Sarah, helping us to think about Trauma 101.
Thank you very much. So I think to get started, I'm going to introduce myself and then I'm going to talk about a little bit about what to expect from my presentation. So my name is Sarah Skinner. I'm a therapist with the Center for Child and Family Health. We're located in Durham, so I'm not in Orange County, but I've worked in Orange County for many years as well. And we do serve people outside of Durham, so we have a lot of clients coming from Orange County. The Center for Child and Family Health focuses on the prevention and treatment of childhood trauma and family trauma. So there are a lot of programs. It's a very large organization. So for myself, I work in the clinic where we work with 100% people who've experienced trauma. We have other programs including training, which I think it's going in and out.
Can you hear me okay? If I talk without the mic, is that okay? No, is that okay?
Can you, maybe I'll step slightly this way? Yeah, that's better. So we have a training program that helps train mental health providers in the community how to treat children and families who have experienced trauma. It's an excellent training program. I've been through it several times myself for different modalities. And we also have home visitor programs. We have early Head Start. We have a lot of other programs it's a really rich and wonderful program, and it's part of the National Child Traumatic Stress Network. So before I start my presentation, I do want to give a content warning. So we are going to be talking about some difficult topics today. We're talking about trauma, and many of us, perhaps even most of us in the room, might have personal experience with trauma. I remember when I was a student in social work, and I think especially with the Western model of medicine, we often talk about trauma as if it happens to somebody else. And I think most of us either have personal experience or have people in our lives who have experienced trauma. So I want to acknowledge that, and so as a result, I want people to do whatever makes sense for you in order to take care of yourself and to take care of your fellow community members who are in this room. So if that means taking a break, if that means checking on your phone, it won't hurt my feelings. It won't hurt my feelings. This is hurting my feelings. If that means taking a walk, whatever that means for you, or if you'd like to talk to someone afterwards, I'll be around for a while, and I'm not offering to, I'm not anyone's therapist or anything, but if anyone wants to talk or check in, I'm happy to talk with folks too. So to get started, we're going to do a very basic overview of trauma and resilience. So this is an enormous topic that I'm going to whittle down to about 45 minutes. So this is meant to be a very basic overview. I imagine you guys will have many questions, but my hope is to set the stage for my colleagues who are going to talk about how trauma impacts the Latinx immigrant communities, particularly in this area, and also the refugee communities. So my hope is that we can get started with some basic understanding of what trauma is, what resilience is, so then we can talk more about specifics, okay? And if anyone has questions along the way, feel free to raise your hand. And if I start talking too fast, which I tend to do when I speak publicly and in life in general, you can feel free to tell me to slow down. Okay. So what is trauma? We're all talking about it these days. We live in pretty exciting times in that we're talking a lot more about trauma. I feel like we're talking about the science of trauma, but we're also hearing a lot more about trauma in the news all the time. It's only recently that people have even started doing content warnings of recognizing the impact of talking about and learning about and hearing about trauma all the time. I imagine for most of us in the room, we may all feel inundated with news about trauma, with our personal experiences with trauma, with if you work with clients or students, with our clients and students experiencing trauma. So it's a huge topic these days. So as a very basic definition, trauma is a very upsetting experience, an experience in which you experience a life-threatening, your life is threatened, or it is perceived that your life is threatened. It can happen to, trauma can be something that happens to you personally. It can be something that happens to your family. It can be something that happens to your community. It can be something that you witness yourself or that you experience. It can be listening to stories of people who suffer day in and day out. So and the next slide is a little bit difficult because it's just a long list of terrible, terrible things that can happen to people. So when we're talking about trauma, I'm going to change the slide, and we're going to have this long list of horrible things that can happen to people and that some of us have experienced and many of our clients and students have experienced as well. So when we think about trauma, when the field of trauma and PTSD research first came out, we were talking a lot about war and combat. And now what we understand is that trauma is wide-ranging. There's a lot of different types of traumatic experiences. So there's obviously war and combat, where it's very obviously that your life might be in danger. But there are these other categories as well. So child physical abuse, child sexual abuse, sexual assault, medical trauma, neglect, traumatic loss, displacement, and traumatic separation. Is there anything on this list, if you can see it, that surprises you or that you hadn't heard of before? No, you guys are seasoned. Great. So for historical and cultural trauma, I just want to take a second to point that out. Has anyone ever heard of those terms before? Yeah. So I want to add this because particularly within the Western model of understanding trauma and PTSD, we think of things as events that happen to us, that happen in real time, that we have personally experienced or someone during our lives has experienced. However, what we know now is that trauma that can happen generations ago has an enormous impact on our brains and bodies hundreds of years later. So for example, slavery still has an impact. Still has an impact on your body, still has an impact on your brain, certainly has an impact on your community. The Holocaust, the indigenous genocide in the United States, many of the experiences that people have, that many of our clients have had. There's a lot of things happening at the border right now that will have reverberations for generations to come. So we live in difficult times. We also live in very hopeful times in some ways. I'll get to that in a second. We're going to talk about the hard stuff now. So I think it's important when we think about trauma to not only think about these finite events that happen to us in real time, but also what we're bringing with us, what our communities are bringing with us as we go forward. And particularly with Latinx, immigrant, and refugee communities, we're talking about generations of trauma that people are bringing with us besides their own direct experience in their lifetime. So this is a slide that I'm not a doctor, but I know a lot about the research in terms of how the trauma impacts the brain and the body. So I don't want to get too bogged down on details. We're not in class and no one needs to understand exactly how glucose regulation is impacted by trauma. However, what I want you to take away, especially, do we have many medical providers in the community or people who work in health centers? Can you just raise your hand? Absolutely, yeah. So a lot of times what happens when people experience trauma, we experience it in our body. Trauma can have a huge impact on your immune system, on your digestion system, certainly has an impact on your cognitions, your cardiovascular system. And so what ends up happening a lot of times is that people show up first, not in my office as a therapist, but at the doctor's office or at a community healer's office. And they say, I feel so sick. I can't get well. I get sick all the time. My body aches, my stomach aches. I feel this pain here, or I feel an emptiness. People talk about, I'm trying to think of a good example. People talk about sharp pains. People talk about, I just can't breathe. You know, my husband works at UNC's emergency department, and he has so many people come in for heart attacks and their panic attacks. And so how most of us experience emotion and pain and emotional pain is also manifested in the body. And it has long-term effects, which we're going to talk about in a second. But the important part is, especially when within the mental health field and within the medical model, we really focus on disease and pathology. And there's also this idea that your brain is separate from your body, which is ridiculous because your brain is part of your body. And so trauma just doesn't impact your thoughts and your feelings and your memories, but it also impacts how you walk in the world. When you have children, what you pass on to them as well. There's an entire field about epigenetics that I'm not going to go into right now, but it's incredibly important to look at how trauma impacts the body. And then, of course, there's the brain. So I'm not going to spend too much time on this either. This is a very, very long topic. But one thing that I think is important to understand about what happens when people experience chronic stress or trauma in their lives is that there is a very immediate response in your brain. So has anyone ever heard of the amygdala in your brain? Okay, great. I hadn't heard of it until I became a therapist. So the amygdala is really, really cool. And I teach all the kids that I work with. I primarily work with children. I also work with adults, but I primarily work with children. And I talk to them about, it's kind of like the guard dog of your brain and your body. So the amygdala's job is super simple. It helps us survive. It lets us know when there's danger. So what happens is that when we experience a threat or a perceived threat, the amygdala gets switched on and we go into fight, flight, or freeze mode. It's not voluntary. We don't get to choose what we do, which is really frustrating for a lot of people, especially for people who are freezers, which is most people. But when we go into fight, flight, freeze mode, the rest of our brain is not working as well. So, for example, the prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for memory, which is responsible for emotion, all that shut down. So what happens with trauma is that, especially for people who are constantly exposed to trauma and stress, much like many Latinx immigrants and refugees and other folks who are made vulnerable for political reasons or just by circumstance, what happens is that amygdala, that little light, never really gets shut off. And so your brain is constantly perceiving threats at all times. And so the other part of your brain that's really focused on joy, on experiencing lots of different types of emotions, it's just, and the part of your brain that's focused on logic and concentration and things like that, and the other parts of your brain that also help you to like digest and develop a really good immune system, they're just not as activated. So you are constantly also flooded with hormones that are telling you that you're not safe, and it's exhausting. Oh, good. Okay, great. I thought something was missing. So, who's heard of the ACEs study? That's so great. I'm so glad. So for folks who don't know, the ACEs study is a study that began, I think in the 90s is when they started with it. Early 90s is what I want to say. Does that sound right? Yeah. So it started off with a medical provider who was noticing, he worked in a weight management clinic, I believe. And so what he noticed that for patients that he had who had a goal of losing weight, which is, I have some feelings about it. We'll move along. But the patients themselves had a goal of losing weight. And they were having difficulty keeping off the weight or being able to continue with their treatment plans. He began interviewing them. And what he learned is that most of his patients had significant trauma in their childhood. And then in the meantime, across the country, another medical provider was looking at the impact of early childhood experiences on medical outcomes. And so thus came the ACEs study. So the ACEs study is a really, really quick questionnaire where you're simply asked if you've experienced a number of very stressful, not always traumatic, but extremely stressful childhood experiences. And most of the things on the list are traumatic events. And so what they learned is that people who have an ACEs study of 4 or more are more likely to have long-term consequences that impact their bodies, that impact their communities, and impact their abilities to experience a quality of life that they would hope for. So, for example, on this side, we have more the disease and disability. So it's not surprising that if someone experienced, for example, childhood sexual abuse, homelessness, a parent with substance abuse, who experienced immigration in a traumatic way, it's not surprising that someone would develop depression or maybe PTSD. It's not surprising. It's not as surprising for us to think, well, maybe someone would then cope by using substances. But the part that was more surprising for a lot of medical providers who were really not very interested in, I don't want to say they're not interested in the lives of their patients, because of course they are, but we're not looking at these other factors in people's lives, was that it had this huge impact on heart disease, cancer, lung disease, sexually transmitted diseases. This was incredibly surprising. And the other part that they looked at then was these bigger social problems. People were becoming more vulnerable because of things that happened in their childhood or throughout their lives. So things like people who experienced adverse childhood events or experienced trauma are more likely to need to engage in survival sex work, are more likely to engage in to be homeless or to experience underemployment, are more likely to kind of continue to perpetuate the cycles of violence because they're vulnerable. And so this was it's a huge landmark study, and there's lots and lots of funding out now, which is really great, about looking at, okay, so now we know what the problems are, how do we fix it? And so I think the important part is that finally the medical community, mental health communities, people who are providing social services, people were beginning to understand, oh, all of these things are interconnected. So what happens to us, the traumas that we experience, do have a large-ranging impact, and we have to address them. So I think it would be helpful. I wanted to go over the DSM. So the DSM is basically the Bible for mental health professionals. It is a list of recognized mental health disorders. So again, this is part of the Western model, but it's important, and I use it all the time, and it's required often to get services. So it's important to understand what PTSD is. I'm not going to talk about complex trauma today because I don't have time, but I just want to put out there that complex trauma is another diagnosis that's not within the DSM that recognizes how trauma impacts people's mental health as well. But for PTSD, what you need in order to be diagnosed with PTSD is exposure to at least one traumatic event, so anything from that list from before. And then following that, you would experience something from certain symptoms from these 4 categories, B and E. And so intrusion, I'm just gonna, if it's okay, I'd like to call out, because I don't always want to hear me talk. What might be an example of an intrusion symptom? Absolutely, flashbacks, where you're suddenly reliving or experiencing the traumatic event. Okay. Any other ideas of intrusion?
Nightmares.
Absolutely, nightmares. Okay. The second category is avoidance. I'm not going to ask you guys what that is. So if you have a traumatic experience, who wants to relive that? Who wants to be reminded of that? And many times, avoidance isn't necessarily just avoiding things that remind you of the traumatic event. It can also be emotions. It can be, I can't tolerate feeling shame, or maybe I can't really tolerate feeling excited or joy or sexual pleasure because it reminds me of something that happened to me. The next category is, it should say, negative changes in mood and cognitions. Trauma impacts how we view ourselves in the world. So in one modality that I work in, it's called cognitive processing therapy, there's this really helpful way of looking at how trauma impacts your worldview. So for example, if you're a child or if you're a person who's grown up the way that many of us do, we're kind of taught that good things happen to good people and bad things happen to who? Right. So it's really convenient because I remember when I was little, you know, if I did something really good, my mom might like take me to go get ice cream, or I might get a reward. And then if I hit my sister or didn't do my homework, something bad would happen. So it's pretty common sense. We teach this to children. It's evident in many of our faith systems that if you do something good, a higher power will reward you in some way. But then what happens when something bad happens to you? What do you think? That you're a bad person. That this is indicative of that you must have failed yourself in some way, failed your higher power in some way, failed your community, that there's something inherently wrong with you. So many people who experience trauma then understand the world, understand themselves as flawed, as sinners, as disgusting human beings. It has an enormous impact on how you feel. Now, I've been very lucky. I had a really lovely childhood, and I'm very, very lucky. Some people kind of grew up with things always being hard. So there are some people who they may have been taught the kind of just world belief that good things happen to good people and bad things happen to bad people. But there are some people who, because of the circumstances that they're living in, kind of thought, well, it's really not a safe place. I've never felt safe. I'm not really a good person, and I can't trust those around me. So then what happens when trauma happens to you? What does that do to you? Yes, it reinforces it. It confirms that belief, and you can say, see, I knew it. And so what happened, this is a really difficult area and an incredibly important area to look at for PTSD, because these world beliefs, these values that you have about yourself and the world have an impact on how you're going to behave in your everyday life, how you're going to interact with people in your everyday life. And then finally is hyperarousal. So I talked about the amygdala before. When the amygdala is activated, what happens is that you are flooded constantly with these hormones. Your brain truly thinks that you are not safe. And so if you do that, you're going to be on edge. You're going to be in a bad mood. Everything's going to piss you off. You're not going to be able to sleep. You're not going to be able to concentrate. You're not going to be able to remember things. You're going to feel terrible. So PTSD is a lot of fun, obviously. So PTSD is incredibly, incredibly painful. It has an enormous impact on all areas of your life. The last part I'll just mention is dissociative symptoms. Many people experience, as a result of their traumas, feeling disconnected from themselves, feeling disconnected from the world, and are kind of walking around as if they're in a dream, or there's a fog, can lose time. So this is a really common symptom as well. So I just talked about a lot of sad ways that, a lot of symptoms that are really painful, but I think it's important to normalize them and to kind of point out why they make sense. So why might it be helpful for me to be more hyper-aroused if I've experienced trauma or I've lived in a stressful environment? Why might it be important for me to be hyper-vigilant? Absolutely, I can protect myself. I can say, I wasn't safe the first time around, but I'm going to be ready the next time around. And I'm going to be ready all the time. So it's, a lot of us in the field, including myself, have experienced secondary traumatic stress. The cleaning crew at our office, they're so sweet. I often stay late at work. A lot of self-disclosure right now. I have poor boundaries, let's just be honest. When I'm late at work, sometimes the cleaning crew has now started a practice where at the very end of the hall, they'll say, Sarah, we're coming towards your office to empty the trash can. Because what happens is they'll knock on my door and I'll be like, so, really great for them. It's mostly I feel bad for them. So for traumatic, I don't know why I told you that. So why might a person develop these symptoms? So it's helpful. It keeps us safe. And so what trauma does is we are wired. I think it's Brene Brown who says that we are wired to survive. we are wired to survive. We are mammals just like a lot of other creatures. We want to survive. So if something bad happens to us, I'm going to be ready. And I'm also not going to get my hopes up about anything. I can't feel good about myself because that's going to be dashed away. I'm going to relive these experiences, and I'm going to avoid anything that reminds me of anything related to this at all costs. So again, just to normalize the symptoms, because I think it's easy for us to say, oh, just stop having those flashbacks. We want to get those away, you know, stop, like, calm down. How many times have you guys been stressed out about something and someone just goes, oh, just don't worry about it, just calm down. So invalidating. And so I just want to validate the fact that these symptoms are actually really make a lot of sense, particularly for people, and we're going to talk a lot more about this, for people who experience chronic stress and have lived in traumatic environments. So I liken it to a winter coat. So if my symptoms, if my hypervigilance, and I'm still trying to figure out what my hypervigilance in the office is doing for me, but if my hypervigilance or my flashbacks to a childhood traumatic event or an adult traumatic event are keeping me safe, I've got this winter coat on, and it's really, really helpful because guess what? Like yesterday, it was really cold outside. So I'm ready. So it makes sense. So PTSD symptoms, if you're living in a war zone or living in a traumatic place, you're going to be a little more on edge. You're going to be a little ready. You're going to be a little bit more ready. It's actually going to keep you safe. So it's really, really helpful. But then what happens? You get to a safer place. The danger's not quite there. We can't ever say that we're fully safe. That just is impossible. And for many of the people that I work with, are still extremely vulnerable, either within their family system, either within the political environment that we live in, the countries that we live in. But when we're in a safer environment, all of a sudden, hypervigilance isn't so helpful anymore. So I've got this winter coat, and I'm going to Miami. It's pretty uncomfortable. So all of a sudden, I'm sweating, probably chafing a little bit because of sweating. I might get stinky. People might be looking at me being like, why is she wearing a winter coat? What is she doing? And so for many people who experience trauma, what happens is these symptoms that might have kept us safe before or helped us feel like we were keeping ourselves safe is starting to impact us in other areas. And so it affects our parenting. It affects our ability to be in relationships that we would like to be in. It affects our ability to make decisions. It affects our schooling, it affects our job performance, it affects just our overall sense of self. And so again, to normalize the symptoms, I just want to just say that we learn by experience. These PTSD symptoms make sense. So just very briefly as a second example, and what's a good hiking trail around here? I used to live in Carborough, but I don't anymore. What's a good hiking trail around here?
Bowling Creek is right here.
Thank you, Bowling Creek. Okay, so let's say it's a really beautiful day today. Yesterday was terrible, but today it's a beautiful day, and I decide I'm going to put on my mud boots because it was so gorgeous yesterday, or it's so gorgeous today, but you know it was really gross yesterday. And I'm going to go on a nice long walk. It's beautiful. I'm looking at the trees. I'm feeling the wind through my hair. I'm having a great time, and all of a sudden, there's a snake. Now, I know that probably a lot of people know a lot more about like snakes in nature than I do, and that there's probably some snakes I should not be scared of, but please just go with me. So there's a snake, it rears up. I don't know if snakes do that, but it might. But it rears up, and then maybe it bites me, okay? And it's really, really scary. And maybe I have to go to UNCED, say hello to my husband. So it's very, very scary. And so from now on, when I go to Bowling Creek and people ask me to go hiking, I'm like, I don't know. You know, when I think about that hike and I think about Bowling Creek, when I even hear the name Bowling Creek, it makes me think of that snake. It makes me think of how much it hurt when that snake bit me. When I feel the wind going through my hair, it reminds me of that moment right before that snake hit me and how calm I felt. And you know what? I'm not going to let it happen this time. I might even try to go this time. I might get a friend who says, Sarah, it's time. Go back to Bowling Creek. And I'll say, okay. Then I go back, and I'm walking, and it's beautiful, and the wind's going through my hair, and I'm really on edge because I'm like, I remember this, I've been through this, and all of a sudden I see this long, skinny thing on the ground, and I'm like, me with the cleaning crew in the office. And I might go running away, I might go into fight, flight, freeze mode. I might run away, I might just freeze right there, and my friend might be like, what are you doing? I might fight it, I might just start kicking the snake. But it turns out that's a stick. So now every time I see something that reminds me of the terrible experience that I have, I'm on edge, I can't cope. So that's all the bad stuff. There's a lot more there. But I do think we can't talk about trauma without talking about resilience. It's not helpful. Who wants to talk just only about the bad stuff if we don't have any kinds of solutions? And also if we don't recognize that trauma's not new. We've been doing terrible things to each other for millennia, and we'll continue to do so. But we've also been able to survive, and we've been able to cope, we've been able to have meaningful relationships, and some of us have done pretty well in extraordinary circumstances. How does that happen? I don't know. I have some clients where I've looked at them and they've told me their stories and I thought, I don't know how you survived. I don't know how you get up in the morning. And sometimes I'm more distressed when talking about it than they are. It's my job to stay calm. It's my job to handle it. But internally I'm thinking, I don't think I could handle that. There are some people who are particularly resilient, but that doesn't mean that, well, for the folks who are not quite as resilient, who develop PTSD after experiencing trauma, that they're screwed. That would be pretty depressing, and there wouldn't be a point in doing this presentation. But what happens is we have resilience. Resilience is something that anybody can develop. So resilience, the most common definition is the ability to overcome hardship, or bounce back. I kind of chafe a little bit at the phrase bounce back because it seems a little bit, I don't think it honors the fact of how hard that is. Like bounce back makes it sound easy, and resilience is hard. Resilience is really, really hard. The ability to be resilient, the ability to develop resilience and work on your resilience, the ability to strengthen resilience in your communities, it's really, really hard. So, what we know, though, is the more traumatic experiences we have, the more stressful experiences we have, it tips the scale. So we're less likely to be able to bounce back because it's exhausting. But we also know that there's another side. The more we can add at the same time these positive experiences, these life-affirming experiences and relationships, we know we can tip the scale. So how do we do that? So in the research, and this is focused more on children, and my presentation is often focused more on children because I can speak with more authority around this area because that's primarily who I work with. And most studies are often focused on building resilience in children. But what we also know is that resilience can be built at any time. It's not like you hit 18 or 45 or 80 and you're screwed. That's not the case. If that were the case, there's again not much point in doing this presentation because adults are in charge of children. But what we do know is that we know that this recipe really helps build resilience. So on the first side, we have a little bit more of how to tip the scale on a more individual basis. And so when I look at these categories, which are very vague, the first two are focused on relationships. So if you have experienced trauma, and I'm not just going to focus on children, but if you are a recently arrived refugee and you're alone, how's that going to go? If you were isolated from your community and you have no one you know, no one who you can talk to, no one you can have tea with, whatever it is, you are less likely to feel connected. And so these relationships are incredibly important. For children in particular, it is very, very important to have a caregiver, someone who is in a parent-like role, who can provide safety and stability. I also want to bring up the relationship part as well because all of us, I mean, we're human beings. We are social by nature. I think Brene Brown also says we're wired to connect or something like that. So that's the other part, is that all of you here are forming connections all the time with people in your community, whether you are an immigrant yourselves, you're a refugee yourselves, whatever your identity is, we're forming relationships all the time. And so by building strong relationships with others, we are enhancing our own resilience all the time. So the second is a little bit more where my job comes in, around problem-solving skills, self-regulation skills, and also the top part of like helping build relationships as well, and enhancing relationships within families. So we know that if people can learn if people are given supports to better engage in problem solving and regulate emotions, so basically I would say like mental health treatment, or this can also be teaching, education too. We know that kids and families and adults are more likely to build resilience. So again, to use someone who's recently moved here from another country and is feeling really overwhelmed, if someone is feeling more capable of, I know how to get my needs met, or I know where to go when I need help, I know where the grocery store is, if I have a problem, I know how to fix it. If you feel more capable, then you're more likely, again, to experience more resilience. And the last area is a little bit more about these values, and this makes a lot of sense if you think about the DSM definition of PTSD. So if you have negative alterations in mood and cognition, so these very painful emotions and these really negative values about yourself and the world and your communities, these areas are really important, particularly faith, hope, and belief that life has meaning. And so people who are part of religious organizations, people who are a part of just community in general, activism, whatever it is, anything that gives you the ability to have hope, which is really, really difficult, and to feel like your life has purpose beyond the terrible thing that has happened to you, that's incredibly powerful. But this is more individual. So the last part is environmental, and this is the most vague set of criteria that you could have. Effective communities, effective cultural practices, effective and institutions. I don't know what that means. However, there is tons of research about what that means, but part of what we're going to do today is that we're going to talk a lot more about what that means specifically, we think, for the Latinx immigrant community in this area, what that looks like specifically for refugee communities in this area. And this also has to be defined by that group of people. So I know there was a disclaimer at the beginning that those of us who are presenting today are not actually a part of the Latinx immigrant or refugee community. So these are based on our work together, but I think just holding out that what it means to be trauma-informed and resiliency-informed for these particular communities also has to be defined by those communities. But we're going to give you some suggestions today about how to promote resilience within these communities. So, I think where we're at right now is, I believe this is the end of my presentation. Yes. So my hope was to give a very, very basic understanding of what trauma is, how it impacts the body. In terms of, I know that many of you are here maybe hoping for ethics credits too if you're a social worker. So in thinking about this, we have an ethical responsibility to to be a part of healing in our community. And so by you attending this presentation today, of wanting to understand how to promote trauma-informed care, how to promote resilience in the community, that is part, in my head, I think that is part of building effective communities. And so my hope is that after we all leave today, we can walk away thinking, I know a little bit more about trauma, I know a little bit more about resilience, I know a little bit more about how to make my community safer and more effective and more healing for people who are very vulnerable in my community. And that's it.
Okay, we've got one question. I'll read it out loud. How is medication used effectively and also ineffectively? And then there's the second part. What is the role of epigenetics in the use of medication in trauma mitigation?
That's a really great question. Again, I'm not a psychiatrist or a doctor, so I'm just going to speak from someone who is a mental health provider. And can I hold on to that sticky note just so I make sure that I understand I'm answering all those questions? So how is medication used effectively and also ineffectively? Well, the good news and bad news is that there is no pill or particular mental health or a particular psychiatric medication that treats PTSD. It doesn't exist. Many times people who experience PTSD are described antidepressants, which can help with some symptoms. So it can help, I mean, if you really think about it, it can, if you're having trouble sleeping because of either constant nightmares or hypervigilance, and you've tried other things, the way I look at it, and with a lot of the patients that I work with, I say, if this is going to help you, and the doctor thinks it's going to help you sleep a little bit better, try it out for just a little while, because if you can't sleep, you're not going to be able to do anything else. However, in my practice, I talk to clients and families about having a psychiatric evaluation. I always suggest that for folks that I want to let them know that there is no pill for PTSD. It doesn't exist. And so it's, for a lot of folks, I say, try doing therapy, try doing things that already give you nourishment, affirms your belief going forward. But in particular for my work, I often encourage people to start with therapy first before medication, because simply, I mean, there just isn't that medication. And the other piece too is that while medication can maybe address chronic sleep issues or maybe difficult mood, or particularly suicidal, that can impact depressed mood, these other pieces, the belief that the world is a terrible place and that you're a bad person, ain't no pill gonna fix that. So what we often see, I get a lot of kids and adults who are drugged up. I get to see a lot, and it's really sad. There was a kid in my office yesterday for an intake who was just sluggish. And the reality is if you take that kid off that meds, those symptoms are still there, that pain is still there. And so you want to make sure you're getting to the root and not just slapping a Band-Aid on it. And particularly, I can speak particularly around children, but particularly on boys and boys of color. Boys of color are more likely to be prescribed medication for ADHD, for behavioral problems, and what happened, and we're missing it. We're missing that these boys are suffering. It's girls too. But what I see most often, and what the research indicates, is that boys of color are more likely to be encouraged to get treatment for oppositional defiant disorder or conduct problems or ADHD, and are more likely to get these difficult meds that actually just add adrenaline. And if you're hyper aroused and you give somebody a stimulant, what do you think is going to happen? Right. So it's tricky. Medication can be very helpful for some parts of trauma, and it is life-changing for some people. It is really life-changing. So I don't want to dismiss that, but I also think we don't want to miss the boat. It's also, again, when we look at trauma symptoms in particular, we're often looking at, my experience has been that a lot of times what we look at is, how is this impacting your functioning? This, kiddo won't sit still in class. That's the problem. Well, maybe the problem is that he's experienced neglect at home, or maybe his dad, maybe something bad happened to his dad. There's lots of things that could be happening, and so the problem is not the seat sitting. Although for teachers, it is also, the problem is the seat sitting. I don't want to dismiss that. And it's a problem for him because he's not learning. But what happens a lot of times is that with medication, there is such a focus on fixing the more immediate problem than actually getting to the root cause. And for a lot of folks, people are really wanting that. Like, that's a lot easier to give a kid a pill than to actually transform our communities. That's a lot easier, but it's not effective. And so if we're thinking about effective, I don't think that giving a kid medication to get him to behave a little bit better is actually, for me, that doesn't fit with my understanding of what an effective trauma-informed community is. But I do want to emphasize that medication can be very, very helpful and life-saving for people. Epigenetics. So, I can't speak to how doctors take into account epigenetics with medication. That's not something that I feel like I can talk about with authority. I would say that my guess is that I'm guessing that if I'm in most psychiatrist's office or most doctor's offices, they're probably not going to say, how do you think that your family's experience with the slave trade or indigenous genocide is impacting your symptoms today. Just a wild guess. But I do think that some doctors, we are learning more that, particularly with some communities, that some medications are not as effective within different communities. Most randomized control trials are tested on middle-aged white men, sometimes middle-aged white women, but it's most randomized control trials are, and that's true not just for medication, but also for mental health treatments too. Because it's focused on particular types of populations, and so there's an assumption that this is going to fit everybody, and that's very unlikely to be true. Do people have other questions while I'm here?
Sarah, I wondered if you could just define what epigenetics means, since I'm not sure everybody knows.
Okay. I will
Sorry.
try. So epigenetics is not my field. So my understanding of epigenetics is, so epigenetics.
Or the person who asked the question.
Yeah, I think that if someone feels really confident, I can talk about it, but I'm afraid that I'm going to say something wrong, and this is being recorded. So epigenetics is kind of the passing along of trauma. So when you, so for example, there's this research by, and I can't remember her first name, but Yehuda is her last name, but there's this really amazing research on historical trauma and just how trauma impacts, like you actually are, as you have children and as we reproduce, we are actually passing along like stress hormones and things like that that have an impact on our kids. So there's this really cool research, setting research, I shouldn't say cool. There's this really interesting research about, for example, the impact of health outcomes for descendants of Holocaust survivors in particular. And so looking at the impact of trauma and how that gets passed along through generations and different kinds of health and mental health outcomes. So that's the best way that I think I can describe it. But it's not my field, but it's a really fascinating field.
I'm the one who passed along that question.
Oh, great.
What I'm actually talking about is dealing with the genetic, literally your genome. And medication now is sometimes linked to being able to deal with, absolutely, it's called personalized medicine, dealing with that particular person. Yes. Not because he's white or because she's green. It's because of that specific set of genome. And I'm wondering if that's hit here yet.
It's starting to. So more people are doing gene testing in order to determine what kinds of medications are more likely to be helpful for you based off of your genetic makeup. It's very expensive. And some insurance plans will cover it. I had a client recently whose children have Medicaid in North Carolina, and they got it done and they got it paid for. Yeah. So a lot of people don't know about it. That's a really good question. A lot of people don't know about it, but it's incredibly useful because I know this person's particular children have severe mental illness, and they've been on a host of medications. And I know that she recently had the genetic testing done, and so she knows, oh, this class of medication, this isn't going to help my child. And that's so useful, so you don't have to waste your time. And also, it's really hard to kind of, especially for kids and adults, you feel hopeless after a while of like, nothing's going to work. Again, I would say, particularly with PTSD, you know, I think that for all medication, it's really helpful to have more personalized medicine, but I think part of personalized treatment and healing is also looking at these other parts beyond medication and herbal remedies groups and things like that. Any other questions? Thank you very much.
So we are moving on to our next presentation with Marlo and Hillary. I'll let them introduce themselves with Reconsidering Trauma in the context of refugee status. Yay! Oh, we have to stand here. Okay. Hi. How are you guys doing? I feel like this is a talk show. I rarely use a microphone. My name is Hillary Rubison, and I'm the executive director of the Art Therapy Institute. We're going to talk. Thank you. We're going to talk today again about reconsidering trauma, specifically when working with communities of refugees. And before we start with that, which I didn't tell you I was going to do, but I did, yeah. I did want to acknowledge, without assuming anyone's gender identity in the room, that there are a lot of women in this room, and I know there are normally a lot of women in the rooms that I hang out with, professionally a lot, but I just think that's really important to acknowledge. A lot of women doing the work, and the wonderful men who are also here. But I just wanted to, yes, I see them too. I see them too. We can clap for them. And I also want to acknowledge some of the power dynamics and the people doing the work. So, beyond that, I also want to say before we start this presentation that because I am an expressive therapist, I forced Marlo to include lots of images, not forced, I asked, to include lots of images from actual clients and awesome people that we work with at our agency. And all of these images we have consent and assent for, so I wanted to say that because just like therapeutic notes, all of the artwork in our programs are confidential as well. So. Okay. Oh yes, now I have to talk about the Art Therapy Institute very quickly. So for those of you who don't know or haven't heard my spiel before, the Art Therapy Institute is a local nonprofit. Shout out to local nonprofits doing the work. We're a local nonprofit that brings art therapy to various populations across the Triangle and Triad areas. Beyond clinical services, we also offer training to graduate students and allied professionals. We have workshop series. We conduct some research. We, what else do we do? Oh, I wrote it down here. We do a lot of community-based projects, and we also lead some advocacy efforts, both for advocacy efforts that our clients would like to do and also for the field of expressive therapies itself. And since 2008, one of our largest programs has been our Newcomers art therapy program, which is working with refugees and immigrants from around the world, both children and adults. And we provide individual art therapy services and group-based art therapy services in various institutions like clinics and schools. Okay.
So I was planning to say that it's incredible designing a presentation with an art therapist because we have these amazing images on the slide, and so I'm really grateful to have the gift of this artwork. My name is Marla Cruz-Kovac. I am the program coordinator for UNC Refugee Wellness, which is a project through the UNC School of Social Work. And we primarily focus on increasing access, equitable access to mental health services and programs throughout the Triangle. We do offer individual therapy for adults. We facilitate community adjustment support groups. We partner with local community leaders and also many local agencies in the area to increase awareness of mental health in the community. And we're currently involved in the North Carolina Child Treatment Program, which Sarah mentioned earlier. They are learning collaborative on trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy, increasing access to this evidence-based intervention for caregivers and children with refugee status.
I realize we need that thing.
Oh, yes. All right. So in getting started, Sarah set up the context wonderfully for us, talking about trauma generally, and we are going to delve in more specifically on types of trauma that people with refugee status may be exposed to. We also want to say that Hillary and I do not pretend to be experts on refugee trauma. That is too broad of a category to, people who have refugee status are too diverse of a category and a group of people to lump into one group. So I want to say first that survivors are the experts. We can tell you about common experiences that people with refugee status have because of the nature of the resettlement process, because of the nature of getting the legal refugee status. However, you can learn about typical experiences all day, and the person who actually went through the experience is the expert. So we have, in our local refugee populations, as we talked about earlier, we have a diverse representation of languages, nationalities, culture groups, as well as experiences. So there is no one refugee experience, which I'm sure most of you already knew, but we do want to emphasize that. The goal of this presentation is to increase awareness of trauma and also help us begin to shift our perspective of the way that people behave and how we perceive those behaviors. And then our goal is to promote resiliency and recovery. When I say that we're focusing on trauma-informed care, and there's 4 R's that you will hear a lot about later, but we're going to realize the way that trauma can impact families, recognize signs and symptoms of trauma in families you may encounter, learn how to resist re-traumatization, and respond in a way that promotes well-being for people you interact with. We are talking about trauma in this presentation, and I do want to take a moment to say that sometimes when we're talking about trauma, it's important to realize that trauma is just a collection of experiences that a person goes through. It's not the identity or entirety of a person. Want to emphasize that it's important to not forget about the rest of the person, their personality, their interests, their positive experiences that they have had, hopefully. And so it's important to talk about trauma and also to realize that people are much more than those experiences. All right, with that said, the triple trauma paradigm is a theory that is included in almost every article on refugee mental health. By article, I mean academic scholarly journal articles, which there is quite a bit of research that has been going on in the past 10 years, but is also coming out now about trauma and the way trauma and resilience in refugee communities, internationally and nationally. So this is a theory that says people who have refugee status may have been exposed to potentially traumatic events in their country of origin, during the process of migration, and also after resettlement. And on the screen you can see different examples of potentially traumatic events in each place. But of course, we also want to say that, as Sarah emphasized before, we'll click one more time, many people could have experienced trauma completely unrelated to war and migration. And oftentimes when thinking about folks with refugee status, we just think about the war and migration piece, and often leave out the category of other events that are not included in war and migration, as well as in resettlement. So, yes, we'll get all those things up. I animated the slide for all these things to pop up, but maybe I should have just put them up there in the beginning.
Oh, just kidding. Don't look at that. Okay.
All right. So when we're talking about trauma, many people who I talk to who have come as refugees to North Carolina say that I'm in a new country now. I can put the past behind me. The past is the past, and I'm going to start again. And that's great. It's incredible that people feel like they have an opportunity to start again. And also, coming to a new country has its own set of potentially traumatic events. Want to highlight discrimination and racism that people may experience here. Underemployment. If someone has been a doctor, a lawyer, a teacher, a health worker in their country of origin or in their country of asylum, coming and scrubbing toilets here can be very demoralizing. And people are doing what they need to do to survive here. So we want to emphasize that the stressors that people experience in the process of coming to a new country often, or can potentially, exacerbate previous trauma symptoms. So if someone has been through a horrible experience in the past and they're already feeling vulnerable, we're thinking about the ACEs that Sarah talked about, and the way that that could be tipping the scale for someone and could compound their reactions. A couple things I wanted to emphasize are family dynamics. So oftentimes when a family comes, their children learn English faster than the parents, because children are amazing at learning languages. And this is a great strength and skill. It can also sometimes flip family dynamics, and sometimes children who are interpreting for their parents may be exposed to things that are adult conversations. So for those of us who are working with families, that's one thing to be really aware of, is if we're asking a child to interpret for us, that's actually, please don't do that, as much as possible. Yeah, and just wanted to emphasize language barrier and isolation as well. When someone has moved to a new country, they may have had support networks that were really robust before in their country of origin. They had people who spoke the same language, and then coming here, they may not know anyone from their community who speaks their language in the place where they're resettled. And so that's something that I see this community really intentionally trying to change with all the groups and partnerships that are going on, but that's something to be aware of too.
Yeah, I was just going to add that I think language barriers consistently, both in the research and I think in the day-to-day practice, are sort of one of the #1 stressors with this population. So just keeping that in mind, and I know a lot of us are doing work to help with that, to help alleviate that barrier. But yeah.
Yeah, let's go to the next slide.
How many of you have seen Maslow's hierarchy before? Hopefully, okay, yeah. So we just wanted to include it because, like Marlo was saying, sorry, camera. The physiological needs, you know, food, water, warmth, safety, rest, sleep, all of these things are so important to address before, you know, we can jump up to self-actualization, which I haven't gotten to quite yet myself. But I think this is really important. I asked Marlo if I could mention we we helped facilitate a joint women's group for refugee women from Burma of different ethnic groups. And I think, you know, in my hope as a therapist, I was like, this is going to be great. We're going to, you know, help these women do self-care and, you know, like it says on the top, achieve their full potentials through the arts, and it's going to be amazing. And the women would come in week after week and say, you know, I need to pay my bills. I lost my Medicaid. I need you to help me figure out how to get my food stamps reinstated. And I was like, okay, let's start here, because that's the base of this triangle. And until you have these needs in place, it's really hard to sort of approach these upper levels. And I'm not saying, clearly I'm a therapist, I believe in working through those upper levels, but I think what's beautiful about this community is that we have different people in our community working on these different, you know, focusing on these different needs. So making sure we're reaching out to each other to help, you know, with this triangle.
I want to say quickly, shout out to the resettlement agencies. You have a hard job. And I know that you're working really hard for people to learn all the skills they need to learn to do well in this country. So I really appreciate all of your hard work on that. And also with the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, there is a way to shift that top of the triangle to integrate all the way down into the lower levels of the pyramid, and that's why that's how we can do this, is working together as a community to do all of this at a time.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that it was really interesting when I was trying to listen to the women's words in these groups and their imagery as well. I realized that it was very hard to separate what we call risk factors from protective factors. So here we are, you know, all at a training at trauma and resilience, right? And these are so intertwined that I feel like we can't even separate them. So when the women would talk about the risk factor of language barriers, then the flip side of that is like, okay, let's do some language acquisition. Or they were very interested in taking English classes or working on English in our group. So I just think these things go hand in hand, and that is a real strength that we're able to work with all of those risk factors. And like Marlo was saying in one of the previous slides, these sort of post-migration stressors are so such a big factor when thinking about trauma. So the fact that we are able to address those is, I think, pretty amazing. And by we, I mean all of us, not us.
Our goal is to redesign our community so that together we're able to better support all members of our community, particularly those who have refugee status or have come as immigrants. And one way that we are focusing on doing this is partnering with community leaders. These are people who are faith leaders or who already have cultural respect and weight in their opinions and what they have to say. So we're focused on partnering with these community leaders to destigmatize mental health and to promote mental health awareness so that these leaders can then provide support to people in their community in a culturally appropriate way.
And this is something that Sarah mentioned as well, but just reiterating the fact that this is a totally normal reaction to abnormal circumstances. I think a lot of our world right now is feeling abnormal circumstances, and a lot of us are sort of pushing through like it's normal, and it's not normal. And I think just acknowledging that is really important for all of us, both the healthcare providers and for our clients as well.
So quickly we'll go through, Sarah did talk about a lot of this. There are a few things specific to the people that I meet with regularly that I just want to emphasize and spend a little bit more time on. So the first is that traumatic experiences and chronic stress express themselves in the body. So like Sarah said, there is a mind-body connection. What you think can affect the way that you feel in your body. How you feel in your body definitely affects the way that we all think. So many people that I talk to have chronic pain that the medical providers have been working really hard to find a cause for, and maybe there is no medical cause. Somatic pain is still real pain, and so it should be treated as such. And I hear people tell me that they worry that their medical provider is thinking that their pain is all in their head. So to really normalize that, no, your body is having an actual reaction. You are feeling this pain is real, and we can normalize and validate that pain and also work to change it at the same time. Substance use is something I'm hearing more and more talked about throughout the Triangle as a concern for some of the folks with refugee status in this community. Clearly there's a crisis across our nation with all people in substance use right now. And it's probably been there for a long time, but this is something that I hear about almost every time I turn on the radio. So just viewing substance use as a coping mechanism that is no longer adaptive or healthy, but knowing where that behavior is coming from can often help reduce feelings of judgment that may arise for us when supporting other folks who have substance use. Just knowing where that behavior is coming from. Not necessarily saying this is coming from trauma, but just understanding why somebody would turn to substances as a coping mechanism. Sarah emphasized the way that trauma affects the brain really well. We also want to say that many people have their response to adverse experiences is to appear well-adjusted on the outside, and this may or may not be a true reflection of what's on the inside, but people are amazing, strong, resilient, and incredible at healing themselves. So as a therapist, of course, I want to support people and promote their healing, but also want to acknowledge that people are already healing themselves, and we're just here to partner. Sometimes people want to come together and support each other, and especially when we're thinking about the community impact of trauma, when a whole group of people, a whole culture, a whole language group have been through a genocide or traumatic experiences, sometimes coming together can be really helpful, and sometimes people do not want to trust each other, which makes complete sense. And so just understanding those dynamics and working with ways to support folks as they are thinking through, how do I talk to this person who their people have been part of the genocide against my people, is something that we need to continue to think about as a community. Right. So the main takeaway is there's no one expected reaction to chronic stress or trauma. Even if the behavior does not make sense to you, there's a logical reason why someone acted the way they did. It may or may not be trauma related, but there is a reason why someone is acting that way. And Hillary will describe this really beautifully through some art.
So I know I've seen a lot of you. Everyone who works in the school system just raise their hand. Who works? Yes. Okay. So a lot of our work, while we work with both adults and children, the majority of our work is in local school systems or pre-K through 12 graders. And I just wanted to bring some of their artwork in here, again, with these students' permission, because they are not here to tell their story, so I at least wanted to bring in their artwork. But as Marlo just said, what does refugee trauma in quotes look like? There's no single answer. This shows up in so many different ways. So I'm going to show a couple examples of some students' work as related to their story very quickly, or part of their story. And I just want to say none of these have to do with the physical responses to trauma, which Marlo mentioned, and I just want to re-emphasize that a lot of this, we find a lot of people coming in with headaches, stomach aches, a lot of somatic issues, and really just validating that is super important. So the first image, and again, I'm sorry these are so small, but you'll be able to get some of these to your home computers if you want. The first image was from one of our first refugee groups in 2008 with a group of teenage students, and this image came from a 13-year-old from Burma, and this student the teacher had told us that they were sort of socially isolated in class. They didn't speak any English or weren't speaking in general, even with students who spoke their home language. They were, sort of tearing up in the corner, and we did not have an interpreter for one of these first groups, and we came in and just sort of laid out art materials, and this was the image that just arose naturally. And I think what this reminds me is that when the story's ready to come out, it's going to come out if you provide the atmosphere for it. The second image in the middle was from a 5th grader a long time ago. He was held back a grade, he was fighting a lot in class, he was involved in a gang, and he was just sort of acting out. So he was put into art therapy with me, and for the first 3 to 4 months did not speak at all, but he was meticulously painting this one image, and he was so focused on it, and by the end of the year, he was able to express enough in English that he had seen his uncle beheaded, and this was an image, and I think no one had any idea about that. The next image I think is really important to talk about, the one in the top right corner, because this is from a student that wasn't showing any signs of trauma, and some of the teachers were like, why are you pulling them out of class? They don't need therapy, they're doing just fine. And I think that this shows that sometimes you don't know what's going on. People can present as really normal, or typical, sorry, these are all in quotes, quiet, reserved, respectful, even academically okay, and you still might not know what's going on with them. The sort of middle bottom one I had to include, this was a typical proudly diagnosed with ADHD, hyperactive, self-proclaimed class clown, talking all the time in class, joking in class, friends with everybody, never listening to my art therapy instructions at all. And, it took a long time and some individual therapy later to find out that he had been the sole witness to his father's death and had not, shared that with anyone. And again, just acting out and sort of being the jokester was his way of, coping with this. And I put him in there because humor is also my own coping mechanism a lot of times. And the 5th one, the last one, I really felt was important to include because this was a student who I was working with individually, and he made this mask. And I had all these personal assumptions as a therapist. I'm like, wow, there is something really deep going on. I need to get to the bottom of this. Like, this is blood and, scars and, needles, and he's using drugs and all of these things. And he just, he comes to express to me that, no, he just really liked this character in a comic book that he wanted to show in a mask. And the needle is because I had gone to the scrap exchange and gotten all these supplies, and he's like, yeah, that just looked really cool to include. So again, I was sort of making assumptions about trauma when in fact he was actually pretty much doing okay and just really liked this comic book character. So just wanted to show those concrete examples of how it can look different.
So now, let's see.
Great.
So now I want to focus a little bit more and spend a little bit more time on reasons why people may feel safe here in the US and here in the Triangle, as well as reasons why people may not feel safe. And I think it's important so that we can practice perspective taking and thinking about someone's experiences. I think sometimes when we think about folks who have come here as refugees, we think, oh, now you're safe. And people may or may not feel that way. So I'm going to ask you to take a moment to think about reasons why people may feel safe after moving here in the US. So think personally to yourself for just a moment. All right, y'all have been amazing at listening to us, so now we're going to give you 2 minutes to talk to a neighbor. And first talk about reasons why people may feel safe in this country. And for this, we can talk about people who are folks who have grown up in America too, and reasons why people may not feel safe in this country. So we'll write on a whiteboard when your time is up, so just be looking up here. All right. Lots of conversation. I am excited that we have so many people from our community who are here today wanting to support other folks who have refugee status or are immigrants. So this is amazing. It's really exciting to hear the chatter. Okay. So these are a few of the reasons why someone may feel unsafe in this country. One thing that do not have up there that's really important is racism and discrimination. I don't know why I left that off, but that can also definitely fall into current events as well.
And policies.
Policies, that's a really good point, Hillary. Okay, so what else did folks come up with? So the question is, what else did folks come up with for reasons why someone might feel unsafe after moving to the US or after living in the US?
Maybe
Yes.
They see a lot of hate crimes.
Hate crimes, so that falls under current events for sure. So this is hate crimes locally, hate crimes nationally, hate crimes internationally. Thank you. I heard somebody else say something over here.
Along with hate crimes, hate speech.
And hate speech as well. We've been hearing a lot of that lately.
Even as low as, elementary school students walking home from a bus stop, being called names or being spoken to in a disrespectful way.
We have a lot of hate ingrained in our culture.
Also, I think a kind of general ignorance about other cultures, because as opposed to Europe or Latin America, we don't often interact with people from other cultures.
That's a really good point. So not knowing about other cultures and some lack of awareness. Nandini, did you say something?
Maybe like having to go from having a close in-person network of support to going long distance with family or friends that were part of your support network before coming to the U.S. and then coming to the U.S. and reconnecting or building up the support network here while still having this long distance support network in different time zones.
Having to start over with a support network and being distant from friends and family. And one thing I want to add to that, Nandini, is I've talked to several families who are telling me about family members and how important these family members are to them, and telling me that these family members are in active war zones or are in places where they're unsafe, whether it's a camp or asylum country. But I have talked to a couple families who were talking to their family members while their town was being actively bombed. So think about that as a reminder, but also a current trauma and stressor happening in such fear for their safety. Yes?
I think just general environmental differences. I mean, if you come from a place where you're not accustomed to having potable water or electricity in your apartment, then everything you do at home is a potential hazard. And the people who are trying to, I'm from a resettlement agency, so this really, the first people who are trying to educate you on that are also emphasizing that those things are a hazard and that you need to be careful around them.
That can definitely raise anxiety when you may be unfamiliar with the things in your home. I get really anxious thinking about hazards in my home, as well as navigating the environment of taking buses and trying to figure out things like insurance. So complicated. Just to go to the doctor, oh my gosh, it's something really hard for me, and I don't have a language barrier, and I have grown up in this system. Yes, ma'am, in the green in the back.
Well, we were saying that a large part of it is that you have the perception of our country, and then you have the reality of our country. And the reality is a lot different than what the perception is. So you come here with one idea of this freedom, and then you get here and then you have the reality of what it is to be in here in a country that's not really this free. Particularly for people of color.
Absolutely. Yeah, so unmet expectations or a different reality for when people come here. I don't know where this comes from, but many people I talk to believe that they'll be given a house, they'll be given a car, they'll have many resources here in this country, and then when they get here, it's so disappointing. As well as being a person who's coming into and may not be aware of our issues of race and discrimination and hate in this country. So someone who is from a culture where everyone's black, then coming into a place where suddenly there are perceptions that are placed on you because of the color of your skin can be really difficult. And also, I've heard from many people too, I've heard people say, wow, in this country, there is no racism, which, of course, is not at all true. However, these are some people who have been coming from countries and cultures where they have experienced such intense oppression and discrimination of being forced into labor, their government having really intense watch, it's probably the wrong word, but surveillance of a group of people because of their ethnicity, because of their skin color, and then they come here and they see that that's different. So it's interesting to see those perspectives, and clearly we have a huge problem with racism in our culture and in our very policies here. But it's interesting to see what people think. Anyone else? Can I say something? Yeah, we'll go with Maddie and then you, Sarah.
Having to interact on a daily basis for daily survival, having to interact with systems and institutions that actually put you at more harm and more risk. Meanwhile, receiving messaging that those systems and institutions are they're critical for your social mobility and for you to be able to succeed and survive, right? So that kind of cognitive confusion. And kind of getting back to perception and reality.
Yeah, so interacting with systems, just amplifying Maddie's voice, but interacting with systems that you're told are for your well-being, but then may or may not be that way. And one thing I do think about is police. When people ask me, is it safe to talk to the police, I have such internal conflict about that because we want people to be able to get access to safety and security that may come with police, and also we know about what's going on nationally with people of color being more likely to be harmed by police or killed by police. So, yeah. And Sarah?
I was just going to say that my
experience with working with immigrants in particular, or just folks who have maybe had less experience being around Black people in particular, because of the export of our media and racism, there's often really negative depictions of Black people. And so with working, when folks come here from other countries who are not Black, sometimes people tell me that they feel being unsafe being around Black people because of the racism that we've exported abroad and the ways in which we talk about Black people and treat Black people. So a lot of immigrants who I have worked with who are not Black have expressed fear in particular and feel unsafe around Black people. So that doesn't mean that they are unsafe, it's the idea of feeling unsafe versus being unsafe. But I think that that's a piece about racism that is a tricky piece to talk about. And I'm still, as a therapist, and particularly as a white person, trying to figure out how do we work on that and address that.
Yeah, that's a big community conversation that I personally would like us to have. It's something that's come up for me a lot as well. One other thing I wanted to highlight is, well, quick, and this will make more sense. So, current events, wanted you to think about all these different layers and policies as well, thinking about international policies, what's going on with UNHCR right now, who is getting refugee status, who is not getting refugee status, and how that can be political. National policies, we've all been hearing about that a lot. And then local policies for sure, as well as agency policies. So all of us work within some sort of agency or institution, whether we're a volunteer or we are an employee. And policies restrict what we're able to do and who we're able to support for certain amounts of time. The people we work with may not know why services are ending, and they can come up with their own conclusions why services are ending. I have heard from many people, as they share their frustrations, that people pretend to care. I have asked someone for help, and they say they can't help me, but I really know they can. They're just choosing not to help me because of the color of my skin, or because of my religion, or because they just are pretending to care and they really don't, because I can't trust anyone, I can't share my story with them anymore, because nobody cares. And so, working within agencies and within policies can be really difficult when services time out and when funding times out. All right, so I know that we did not focus on the other side of the equation of reasons why people may feel safe here. And does anyone want to?
I was going to say if we have to go up, I'll link it up.
Okay, Hillary's going to link this up.
I'll link it up.
Which is great. All right, so we will jump ahead, and Hillary's going to take this away.
Yeah, and just for time's sake, I know all of us are doing pretty quick presentations. They might not feel quick to you, but as far as covering these really broad terms, or just sort of anything, we're going to have resources later. You can Google a lot of these terms or anything. But I did want to say something about that last point about people pretending to care, or the timelines not matching up between what service providers can give. Oh, it doesn't need to be on the slide, does it? And what the clients might need. And in the same group that I was talking about that Marlo and I helped co-facilitate, something happened where there were a lot of student interns, and I'm not sure if a lot of us work with interns or people who are sort of on that school schedule. And come May, a lot of those students leave, and they might leave their post, and then what happens with the clients? Are they left without health care, mental health care, or whatever's happening, social workers? And in one of the groups we ran, again, I had these dreams of grandeur of making this great arts-based, therapeutic project, and went in with all these great ideas, and the women in the group, learning that the interns were going to leave in May and that the group would probably end at that point, said, no, that's not working for us. How can we make this group strong and stable? And I was like, oh, what does that mean? That means we have to find funding to keep it going. We have to reach out to other community collaborators to keep it going. What does it mean? And why are they asking that question instead of what I, as this white therapist, wanted to have them answer? Why was this the question? And then it's like, oh, well, one of the reasons is we just had the election of 2016. Why would they want a community to be strong and stable that they've been going to for a while? Why would that be important? So just stepping back and leading to this idea of cultural safety, which has a lot of different terminology, but one of it talks about how do we make the institutions that we're working in, quote, safe for the people that we're working with. And what that meant is that we had to change our structure in our institution, and lucky enough, for this specific example, Refugee Community Partnership agreed to partner with us to keep the women's group going. We pooled our resources to do that, so we were able to sort of meet the needs and desires of those women. But I think that takes a real shift in perspective of how are we actually going to change our agencies to make it what our clients need, and what does that mean in the Western medical model when funding's an issue and time's an issue, and we're going on our own schedules and our own research needs, and what does that really mean? So big questions to think about. Should we just jump into cultural safety?
Part of our presentation title is ethics, and so as a social worker, as social workers, for those of us who are social workers, we do have a code of ethics, and part of this code of ethics has pretty strict boundaries around relationships. So these are clearly for the safety of the people we work with as well as ourselves. However, this does not always fit within the culture and general interactions of the people that we're working with. So, for example, there have been times where so therapy is a time-limited thing, and so it can be really tricky to ease those transitions and help people connect with other support, and people have worked so hard to establish that relationship. It can be really confusing. So sometimes the ethics and policies within our professions also impact the way that the safety and the way that our services are perceived.
Yeah, and then where do you make the ethical choice to bend? What are your personal ethics, and do they match up with the codes of your profession? And it just interesting choices to consider. And we're gonna ask you all to do a little safety exercise later. Don't be scared; it's gonna be great. But just really quickly, this idea of cultural safety. Again, thinking about what feels quote safe. I don't really love that word, to the person that you're working with. How do your agencies incorporate the culture of the client if they want that culture to be in there? Who should be in the room when services are being delivered, and who shouldn't? Do they want family and friends in there? Do they want a male or a female, doctor? Do they want to be in a group of women? Do they want to be alone? Just how can we give that sense of agency and control back to the clients? We're going to think about that a little bit later, I believe, in Ennis's discussion about how we could take this back to our own agencies. I think for time, I'm going to skip that example. Where are we now? Oh, good. Okay. So this is a quote I loved. It's actually, I learned it from Jen Skies, who used to work at CWS, but she's no longer there. But it's from Adrienne Marie Brown, and it says, "Move at the speed of trust," and then ... build the resilience by building the relationships. And again, this can be really, really hard in the Western medical model. Just sort of, again, feeling like we do have time to spend with our clients, if time is what they really need to be able to share their stories. And again, the idea of cultural safety and cultural humility, which is another term that we'll throw out there, and hopefully you guys can look up later. But the idea that cultural competence isn't really enough. We're never going to get to a point where we are confident in dealing with these with such a diverse group of people, and we know all the answers. And cultural humility is saying that we don't know all the answers, and we're going to continuously self-reflect and continuously ask questions on what we don't know, and keep going to trainings like this, and hopefully being and asking questions of the people we are actually working with. And I think we have time. I do want to give this really quick example. The colored pencils are there for a reason, because this is an example from my work that really sort of taught me this. But this was, I was working with a little boy from Burma years and years ago, and again, he spoke no English. He was probably about 6 when I started working with him, and I would just put out some different art materials on the table. And I chose colored pencils because if anyone's ever worked with colored pencils, they're kind of a contained material, right? Like, they're not like paint where you can splatter it everywhere. They sort of give you a little bit of containment, if that makes sense. So every week I went in there, and he would every week take the colored pencils and he would dump them out, and he would just put them in rainbow order. And then he would put them back in the box, dump them out, put them in rainbow order. I'm like, okay, I'm just gonna go with this, just hold the space, let him do his thing. Eventually he would do this practice And then he would also draw this kind of creature in black, but that was the only pencil he would use. He wouldn't use the ones in rainbow order. I'm like, okay. And after months and months, this practice continued. And again, as his English developed in school, he was able to tell me that this black creature was his pet pig that had died in Burma after the soldiers had taken it away to use for food. So on the day he told me that, he took the pencils that were in rainbow order and he drew a rainbow over the pet pig. And I love that story because it wouldn't have come out on day one, you know. And right now I'm in a field that has the luxury of working with people over time. I know that not all fields have that luxury, but I do hope that we can all find space to provide the time and support for people's stories to emerge at their own rate. Okay, we'll just keep on pushing through. So again, we talked a lot about the idea of resilience and strengths-based models instead of deficit-based models. Again, this does not mean denying the pain. You know, first and foremost, this is a normal reaction to an abnormal circumstance. So validating that, normalizing the trauma response is so important. And just, again, meeting people where they are. You know, sitting with that little boy, if you have the luxury of that, and letting him lay out those pencils until he's ready to tell his story, which he might not ever be ready to, or it might take years to do that. And then I had to throw in the research practices again, and just because I'm not sure where all of us are coming from if our institutions have to do research, but really thinking about what are the ethics of our research practices? Why are we doing this research? Who is it serving? You know, who's in control of it? Just all of these questions that I think sometimes aren't asked when we're just trying to, you know, get some data. I think that's really important. And then this idea, the second one, post-traumatic growth, which have people heard of that term before? Post-traumatic, okay. So post-traumatic growth, and then this next term, which is adversity-activated development, which I don't know if people have heard of that as well, but they're very similar, except I really like adversity-activated development because, as Sarah was talking about, it acknowledges complex trauma. So post-traumatic growth is almost always based on a single circumstance, a single traumatic experience, like a car crash or you know, surviving breast cancer, something like that, versus adversity-activated development, which is like you might have had multiple trauma or traumatic experiences, and how can we approach all of that? And the idea of action-based models, which we're going to get to at the end of this training, which is we're giving you all this information, now where can we go from here? And not only is that important for us as practitioners and people working with these communities, but it's also important in working through trauma. Actively working through your issues is a really empowering way to work through trauma. So I think that's really important. And we did throw up there a couple examples. We had to throw in there Express Sparks Therapy because I had to do that. And then we also have you know, a lot of amazing other nonprofits in our area. I think we put up there, you know, like Transplant Traditions, Traditional Kitchens, different religious groups. There are so many others, but this idea that sort of actively doing something that empowers you, or that is strengths-based, that has to do with who you are as a person, you're strengthening your identity, your community identity, your individual identity. I think that's a really great way to deal with trauma. And then, Marlo, I don't have my thing where it defines healing center engagement because I can't find that. Oh. Oh, I found it, just kidding. Okay, so double-sided pages, we're saving trees here. So this final slide, you know, trauma-informed care, which is a buzzword, everyone's, well, hopefully doing trauma-informed care, but then this idea of also moving that to something called healing-centered engagement. Has anyone heard of that before? Maybe, yes, no, I can't see heads. But this idea that healing-centered engagement, which I'm just gonna read the definition here, it goes a step beyond trauma-informed care to systematically foster well-being for the whole person and their larger community. And I think that's so important when we're talking about systemic trauma, collective trauma, community-based trauma, really expanding that to a community-based model. I think I'm going to, I sing a lot, sorry. I think I'm going to skip the rest for time's sake so we can,
Nope. Yes.
Oh, yes, okay. Do you all have it in you to hear one more arts-based example? Because I think, okay, great. And if people have seen me talk before, I'm sorry you've already heard this example, but I love this example. So basically, a lot of people ask, how can art therapy or expressive therapies specifically help when working with refugee communities? And I think a lot of it, again, the language barrier. I've spoken a lot about how we can just put out art materials and people will tell their story in a nonverbal way often, which is amazing. And beyond that, the arts are universal, so a lot of people who've come from different cultures have practiced arts forms in their own communities, so getting back into the arts can be a really healing and empowering process. And also, the idea that trauma, as Sarah was saying, lives in our body and it lives in visual imagery, okay? So verbally talking about it does not always work, whether you can speak the language or not. So this example, I want to tell this example because it shows how the process of taking an image that might be traumatic in your head, putting it out there into the world, and then reworking it allows you to reintegrate a new image. And that's something that sometimes verbal psychotherapy it can't do in certain ways. I'm a proponent of verbal psychotherapy as well, but as far as like seeing an actual image, the action of making art, I think is really important. So very quickly, we were running a refugee women's group, I believe back in 2011, and this was also for women from Burma back then, and we were doing quilts. And this is actually important to mention too, because we had put flyers up in all these different languages from different ethnic groups, and it said, come to a women's art therapy group. And the first group, no one showed up. We're like, okay. And I don't know if Lika's still here, but I believe someone was telling me, like, you know what, that's not going to work, that language. Let's alter the language a little bit. So we changed it to, come to a women's fabric arts group. And, the next week, 13 women showed up. We're like, okay, all right. So stigma therapy, but then, this is important to learn. So, and of course, in that group, we ended up doing amazing therapy. So one of these groups, one of the women, I don't know if you can see it from there, but can you see the little butterflies on the top? Okay, so she cut out a rose, she glued some butterflies down, and then she proceeded to tell the story. We did have an interpreter there. She proceeded to tell the story that she was going through a divorce, and her 4 children, who were represented by the butterflies, were being taken away from her, essentially, and she didn't know how to get a lawyer to sort of fight her ex about this, and she was really, really nervous that her children were going to be taken away from her. So beyond, again, linking her up with legal communities and resources that she needed, we allowed her to work this out through the arts. So if you go to the next one. So again, this is not a great picture, but I will explain what it is. But what she did through the art making process is those 3 little things on the side, she actually had 3 kids and herself as a butterfly as well. She found little baby beads that actually looked like babies. I have no idea why I had these in my bag, and she took them and she just sewed them to the fabric. She wrapped them over and over to the fabric, and then she put the initials of her kids next to them. And in doing that, she was literally binding her children to herself. And then she added this border around the whole thing, and again, making that container, containing something that was probably in real life out of her control, but then enacting that through the artwork and integrating that, strengths-based image was really, really powerful. So that's one way the art can do that. And then similarly, last example, this was a woman who was talking about how her children were still in Burma. She had come over alone, and she had told them when she left, and while they were waiting to be able to come over to the US, she said, well, when you look up at the stars, I'll look up at the stars and we can connect that way because the stars are universal. So she made this image, we all thought it was really beautiful, but something just wasn't sitting right with her, and she said, this isn't capturing how I feel when I think about this and when I look at the stars. This isn't capturing it. So the next week we brought more materials, and you can't see, but these are tons of sequins, and this was like midway through the process. And she just kept gluing sequins on top of this, and it just, to see her face creating this was such joy, and just to show like how important looking at the stars were. So again, how do you use the arts to create a new image that you can then reintegrate? Now we're gonna make you guys do stuff.
Before we enter our mindful minute, well, this is transitioning into it. Before we enter our mindful minute, I do want to talk briefly about vicarious trauma or secondary traumatic stress or compassion fatigue. It has lots of different names, but essentially this is when we hear hard stories over and over, or are exposed to somebody else's trauma and distress. This can have an impact on us. So mindfulness is a wonderful way to recenter and to ground yourself into the present moment. We're going to practice that in just a minute. But especially working with folks who have been refugeed and who have had horrible experiences where everything was fine one day and then the next day it wasn't, has had a change on me. And for a while, when I was interning with Refugee Wellness 2 years ago, I noticed there was a time where I would hear thunder and I would think, oh, are we going to be bombed? Or I would hear, I would think of these stories that people had told me when all of a sudden something happened, and I was finding myself feeling anxious about something happening, where it would be a catastrophic thing, or it would be something that came out of the blue. But I was constantly hypervigilant and worried about it. So we just want to normalize that this is a possible experience that at some point you are likely to have if you are supporting folks who are going through trauma and stress. And it's normal, and highly encourage you to talk to others about it. And as within your agencies, create a culture where it's okay to talk about this. Okay, so now our mindful minute.
Are you all ready? Okay. I'll get on my best mindfulness voice, which I don't really have on. Okay. Okay, so take a moment to get comfortable in your seat, whatever that means to you, as long as it doesn't mean moving into the space of your neighbors. So I'll let you get into that space. Okay, so once you are there, and again, this will just be a minute, so you just have to be comfortable for a minute. Please close your eyes or lower your gaze, whichever feels more comfortable to you. And in this short minute, we would like you to visualize a place that you have visited where you have felt completely safe. Maybe this was when you were alone, or maybe you were with others. Maybe it was outdoors or inside. Maybe it's a place you visit regularly or a place you only saw once. A place in your past, a place in your present, or perhaps it's a place you would like to be in the future. Now that you are there, imagine turning your head from side to side. What do you see around you? What colors? What do you smell? What do you hear? What is the temperature? Note how your body feels in this space. Once you feel settled there, I would like you to breathe in and out slowly 3 times, and then when you are ready to come back, please open your eyes. For those of you who have come back, I would like you to come up with a 6-word story about where you were. That's it. No more, no less. 6 words. And if you are willing, I would love you to share that 6-word sentence with your neighbor. You don't have to share if you don't want to.
So mindfulness is a great way to ground yourself and to recenter yourself. I use this all the time. There are many different ways to practice this. There are many different ways to bring yourself into a space that feels comfortable if you're not in a space comfortable now, or to bring yourself into the present moment, into the space that you are in. We wanted to do this example because this is something that you could do with a person you're supporting, as well as with yourself. And if you don't have access to language, you can also do this in visuals. You can do this by just taking deep breaths together. and it's a wonderful way to also create more of a relationship together. Hillary said, carrying safety with you, safety can be inside. Okay, so Susan, do you want to introduce the next group?
Thank you so much. We are going to have a quick announcement by Maddie Hayes, who's with Refugee Community Partnership and Traditional Kitchens, to inform us about lunch.
Thanks, Susan. Hillary and Marlo, wow, thank you so much. That was amazing. My 6-word story, I'm still like wiping tears out of my eyes. So to kind of, how Traditional Kitchens, it's interesting, just ties into what we just did. My 6-word story was my mother's kitchen with forehead kisses. It's still gonna jam, oh my God. But okay, bringing it to Traditional Kitchens. Traditional Kitchens. So we last week sent out an email for folks who are at the training today who wanted to support Traditional Kitchens, which is a refugee women-led food enterprise, a cooperative cookery of the Refugee Community Partnership. So we did it through pre-order style. So we've got about 45 folks who are going to be having lunch with us today. The way lunch is going to work is we're going to be set up outside the building. So when the training lets out, just come pop by the table and we'll have your order ready to go. I just wanted to take a minute to, if anybody, you have a device or a laptop with you today and you haven't paid online, and you have a couple of minutes to do that during the break, it would be awesome because that'll help us. The more pre-payments we have, the more we can keep traffic flowing, and since we have a bunch of people who will be letting out at the same time, we just want to be able to get you off and on to the rest of your Friday. So if you have a couple of moments for that, that would be great. And now to tie it back to the exercise that Hillary and Marla just led us through, Traditional Kitchens came about through conversations among a number of moms in RCP, talking about food creation being the space that feels most like home, and how cultural food traditions is one of the cornerstones for preserving one's cultural identities. And cultural identity being intimately bound up with trauma and traumatic, curbing the effects of trauma in maintaining cultural identity and looking at when people are resettled to the US, all of the overt, but probably more frequently covert ways that we are coercing people to unlearn their own cultural identities and to abandon those cultural identities, whether that's through worldview or food or language, and looking at ways to rather preserve and maintain cultural identities. And so Traditional Kitchens sprung out of that place of food making being a place that feels most like home, it feels most safe. Yeah, I want to let us all get to our break, but I just wanted to say that and say thank you for everybody who's ordering from Traditional Kitchens today. This is a new startup business, and everybody's, we're learning the ropes as we go. So we're going to be sending out a feedback survey after today. So if you ordered from Traditional Kitchens, would love to hear your feedback on the palate experience of the dishes that you had, and a few other things as well. So yeah, we'll see y'all after the training.
Thank you so much. Thank you to Maddie, to Zakia, the chef, and April Wu for helping to make all of that happen. We're very thankful to them and to everybody here. Thank you. I also, this time Donna's in the room, so I can acknowledge her again. Donna, wave in the back. Many thanks to Donna for helping us with equipment and setup and helping us to have a smooth training today. We appreciate that. Also, we had a couple of questions. All right. So for Hillary and Marlo, how does the artwork of refugee children show the sense of loss and also the sense of resilience?
I was
helps the artwork show the sense of loss and also the sense of resilience?
I mean, I can give a whole lecture on that, so I don't know. That's hard to answer. Yeah, I mean, I think that you saw a lot of some of the images of loss up there throughout the presentation. I realized that I didn't do a ton of resilience images, which is not okay. I don't know why I didn't do that. Oh, the one, yeah, that's true. The one for the flyer was one of those. But I think that it comes out all the time. You know, Maddie just mentioned cultural identity, and we do a lot of art-based work focusing on both, you know, personal identity and cultural identity. And we run a lot of groups with kids from different cultures all in the same room. And I think that's where my favorite you know, sense of hope comes out, when they'll either do self-portraits and then around it they'll show images of hope from either the country they came from or what they hope for the future, or sort of both. You know, we've had some images where it shows sort of the mountains of Thailand and then Chapel Hill High in the corner, and there's like, I'm like, oh, that's a combination of both, and the kids are like, this is just my picture. Like, what is it, you know? And I think that that's so important, just this biculturalism or multiculturalism, and how that sort of promotes self-esteem and self-confidence, and how we should just be working with that. That was a really short answer to a very big question, but oh, you can come to a workshop at ATI in a couple of weeks if you want to learn more. So we have one going on.
Is there one more question? Yes.
So how do you feel that as clinicians we contribute to the trauma that our community members are feeling? I just kind of feel like earlier when somebody made a statement about the custodial staff having to tiptoe in to say, you know, like, I'm here, so don't be afraid of me. Like, for me, that is us contributing to trauma. And so I would like to know, how can we be more mindful about our practice and what we're doing so that that doesn't continue to occur if we're supposed to be the people that are home?
Great question.
Thank you so much for bringing that up. And this was something that we meant to talk about and kind of skipped over. So one big piece of that is giving people control. I know that those of us who are therapists and those of us who have other roles sometimes are limited with what type of control we have. We can't control certain situations, but we can give people choices, and we can give people as much access to control as possible. So rather than saying, we are going to be doing this type of therapy because this is what I think is best for you, it's definitely coming together as a partnership, having somebody create their own goals, asking them what's going to help them feel better, and establishing that collectively together, rather than working kind of from a top-down perspective. I think that's one way clinicians can contribute to the healing while also avoiding re-traumatization. However, just the process of connecting with a person can sometimes be re-traumatizing. For example, in the intake process, or asking people questions, even questions like, what do you like to do? How are you feeling lately? Can remind people of interrogations. So really clearly explaining who you are, what you're doing, what the purpose of these questions are, and then also giving someone the option to say, no, get out of my house. That's completely okay. I do a lot of in-home work, and so usually start sessions off by saying, I'm a guest in your home, so you have control over when I leave. So please tell me it will never be rude if you ask me to leave your house now. So trying to rebalance that power dynamic that comes from what we typically consider the helping relationship, where there's a helper and then there's the person being helped, and that power dynamic, I think, adds a lot of trauma and contributes to. It doesn't contribute to the supportive healing collaboration process. And so really working to establish equality is a huge step. However, these are just starting points, and this is something that I'm continuing to reflect about and think about daily.
Yeah, this is just really fast, but I think it goes along with that, and I will talk about it later in Ennis's presentation as well. But just the idea of this paperwork. When we go into homes, we literally have 25 pieces of paperwork that Medicaid requires us to do at an intake, and every time I just apologize to the families, and then I hope that, you know, the interpreters are saying that because I can't speak the language, I don't really know, and it just feels gross sometimes. So I think, you know, we're trying to make sure that all the paperwork is in the languages of the families we work with, but a lot of the families don't read those, you know, or can't read the paperwork. And then I'm thinking also, not only do we need to put it into multiple languages, but what is the first language that we're using? How am I writing this form in English? What do the actual words look like? How legalese does this look like? And how could that re-traumatize someone when they're signing something that they might not understand? And that is just very frustrating to me, part of our lovely system.
So I'm the person that jumps a lot. I'm a very jumpy person. So 100% of my cases as a therapist are trauma cases, which we actually know is very unhealthy. Research-wise, it's not supposed to be that way, but it is my job. And so I brought up that example because I think one thing that's important for us to think about, and I think that Ennis is going to talk about this too, is self-care. And not as a whole like, oh, Sarah, when you go home, make sure you take a bubble bath or else you're not taking care of yourself. But it's also about like having trauma-informed organizations that are taking care of your staff members, getting good support. Basically the things that you are encouraging for your clients and your community that you're also practicing within your organization, that there's a push from your leaders, from your coworkers, for us to take care of each other. And so I think part of the way that we don't re-traumatize other people is we're not constantly re-traumatizing ourselves. So I think that's part of it as well. And it's a good conversation also. It's been there's a particular man who works at night who he and I have had interactions about my jumpiness, and we've talked about that, about what it is. And it's been a good opportunity for us to develop a relationship.
Did you have any thoughts that you wanted to share? It sounds like you have quite a bit of experience as a therapist too. So.
But that's also me working in the school. I keep hearing our staff say that our schools are safe spaces for people. And the expectation is that you are to behave as if our school is a safe space. But we're not creating safe spaces. But the perception is that we are. And that everyone else needs to acquiesce to how we're feeling or what our beliefs are. And so just trying to think about how am I contributing to that and allowing other people to contribute to somebody else's daily lived experience, which is very traumatic.
Absolutely. And this goes back to the people we're working with being the experts and re-establishing that power dynamic. I don't get to decide what is safe for someone else. And so having those conversations with people, what would help you feel safe? Is safety a thing this person has ever experienced? These are great questions to start with, but also knowing that our institutions, our systems are not safe and not expecting people to feel safe in them is something important. So thank you so much.
Wonderful. Many great comments, suggestions, learning opportunities here from each other. I'm very thankful. We are going to take a quick, please, 5-minute break, bio break, coffee break, whatever you need. Please come back in 5 minutes so we can try to end on time because we've got some more important information from Ennis coming up. Thank you.
Yes. We had shared all our slides with each other as we were developing our presentations, but we just saw each other's slides a couple of days ago, and despite that fact, I think we did a great job of kind of complementing each other, so I hope you agree. And I echo all of the information that both Sarah Marlowe and Hillary have shared with you, and you can apply that to what we're going to talk about now. I also have had the honor of working very closely with refugees from Burma for the last 10 years, and my role for 18 years, which was the mental health specialist with Orange County Head Start and Early Head Start. For those of you who don't know Cha-Cha and Missy, or if those names sound familiar, I had the honor of hiring Cha-Cha and training her to be an early Head Start home visitor. And so through those relationships that those two folks had with the community and developed with those parents, I was able to learn with and from the refugee community, and I'm so grateful for that experience. And I also want to just thank everyone who made this happen, and both Latino Health Coalition and Refugee Health Coalitions for making this happen today. This is a unique effort. This doesn't happen often enough. And I know I work in other communities and they're very jealous that we do things like this in Orange County, so bravo, Orange County. Woo! Okay, so one of the first things I want to own is that you will see that I use Latino instead of Latinx in my presentation. That's something we're talking a lot about at El Futuro, where I work now, about what terms to use and when. But where we are right now is that the families and children we serve are not identifying as Latinx in most cases. So first generation and undocumented Latino immigrants, generally when you bring up the term Latinx, don't know what you're talking about. It is not a Spanish word, and no words in Spanish end in X as far as I know. So I don't want to be being exclusive in any way. I'm not saying I don't agree with the term. I think what it is, for those of you who don't know, is a gender neutral term. Spanish is not a gender neutral language. I don't speak it. That's one of the things I also want to own, is that I am a monolingual gringa. And I did a webinar for El Futuro a couple of months ago about the experience of earning trust in the Latino community as a monolingual gringa. It's not easy, but I have some lessons learned that I shared in that webinar. So the next thing I want to say is El Futuro. I hope you all have heard of El Futuro. El Futuro started in 2004 in Carborough, but unfortunately no longer has a location in Orange County. But we are a very strong force in Durham and in Siler City, so there are 2 different clinics. And Luis, would you mind standing up? Luis is a member of the El Futuro professional community and has been there a little longer than I have. And if you want to learn more about El Futuro, find him in one of the breaks today. He also has more copies of the brochure that tells you more about El Futuro in Spanish and English. We can get you more of them if you want to have them in places in your work life. And then my role at El Futuro is creating this new network, which most of you have a copy of the flyer that was on your chair, right here, called the La Mesita. What does La Mesita mean? Little table. That started in Carborough as a little table that people sat around to share ideas and wisdom and learn from each other, and it has evolved into a statewide network thanks to the Duke Endowment that you can be a part of. How many of you are already a part of the La Mesita Mental Health Provider Network? Woo! Great. Well, I hope if I ever see all of you again, you'll all raise your hand because it's free and it's a way to post jobs, find jobs, post resources, ask questions, find out if something's happening in a community near you or not near you, and just reduce isolation across the state. So I've been honored to be able to be a part of that effort, and I hope you'll join us in that. Okay, let's get started. So I'm going to start with an image that I actually posted on my Facebook page because it is. Has anybody seen this image already? Okay. This is an image from a month ago, and not even just a few weeks ago, of the people who are being referred to as the caravan that is moving to the U.S.-Mexico border and traveling for different lengths of time, but typically at least a month in a variety of ways, but much of it is on foot. So this is a dad and I'm not going to say daughter because I'm not sure, but I'm assuming daughter, on his shoulders. And I just think that's a powerful image of, what do you see when you see that image? What words come to mind? Tired. Mm-hmm. Right. Yep. Togetherness. Yeah. 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 She looks like she's about 3 years old, and I don't know, for those of you who've had a 3-year-old, can you imagine them ever falling asleep on your head that way? I mean, the stability it takes to keep from falling off, like that takes practice to be able to sleep like that. I think that's a powerful image. So I feel like I know that child and that dad because they remind me so much of the families I've worked with over the years. Most of my work with the Latino community has been in their homes. And so I've been able to see those kinds of interactions with people here. And so it reminds me of those many times I've seen kids and parents together with that level of connection and safety. I'm going to move to these images. What do you think when you see these? Same caravan. Safety, heard someone say. What else? Determination. That same connection we saw in the first image, right? This is interestingly, these are all dads and children. We often see only mothers and kids and think of families as about women and children, and dads get left out. So I love that I was able to find several images of the dad being the one physically connected to the children. Any other thoughts about these pictures? How do they make you feel? Sad. Worried. What else do you see going on in the picture beyond the two, the fathers and children who are the focal point? What else is going on there? See, the other people, what those other people are doing is forming a human chain to help the people get across the river safely as part of their journey. So those are beyond just the family members of these people, but they're extended family of people who were picked up along the way. So these are not people likely that they're related to by blood, but who have become a community over time and are taking care of each other. I love that. And yet I also see a raging river, right? Because we're not talking about some just puddles we're walking through. That is a full-on river. And what I don't see is boats, or rescue lines, or professionals, right? So what I see is resilience and strength in the face of a challenge that I hope none of you have had to face, of trying to figure out how to get children and families safely across a raging river without any kind of professional support or expertise or boat. So that's what I see. The other thing what are these people wanting? Where are they going towards?
I know this t-shirt and some roses probably. That makes me think this American dream.
Ah, I love it. I love it. You found a symbol that represents that. And can we assume that that's what all of that group of people is wanting, right? They're wanting a better life for themselves and their families, right? And they are determined to get there even when there's a river between them and the other side, and many, many miles and danger and risk and unknown, right? So the level of courage and strength and determination and community and connection that it takes to survive that is amazing, right? It's amazing. I don't think I have that. I will tell you that. I don't think when I moved here to go to grad school in 1990, I had to drive with a cat in a car across the country with no air conditioning, and I thought that was bad. It did not require the level of resilience that every single one of these people is required to get here. And I just picture them envisioning that when I get to the other side, it's all going to be okay. When I get there, it's all going to be okay. And again, these were all just taken a few weeks ago. So these images you probably recognize. And what do you think when you see these images? From not so long ago, 6 months ago. Say what? Separation, right. So the image on the right is children without adults in a detention center. The image on the left shows a border patrol interacting with a parent with a child present. So this happened at the border. After that journey, this happened when they got there. And even with, I'm sure, the rumors about how bad it's going to be because things have changed and people are being separated, that group of people we just saw in the pictures before is still coming. Think about that kind of power of determination and hope. Hope in the face of information that gives you no reason to hope, right? And the other thing I want to remind us is that this is not new. This is not a new thing that just started happening. It's been on the news a lot more, and we're hearing about it, and people are arguing about it, but it is not new. This is a train that's called La Bestia, which is another way that many people come across that long journey, and that is typically the way they would come. Those trains are cargo trains. They are not made for people. So the risk and the intensity of the journey is not new. It's when you get there to the border that things have gotten different and harder and worse. But the journey has always been one that takes such high levels of determination and strength and hope and involves so much risk. So I think it's important for us to put it in context that this is not a new thing, and that the families and children who are already here and have been here for 15 years, each has a story to tell about their journey. And if you've had the opportunity to hear some of those stories, you know how varied they are. So you cannot assume anything about someone's story until you ask. But know that many, if not most, of the stories include trauma just on the journey itself. And the other challenge is that the reason that many of these immigrants are leaving the situations they live in their country of origin is because of traumatic experiences there. So the trauma often has already happened, is compounded by the journey, and then we're going to talk more about what, and we've been talking today already, about what the experience is when they get here. So let's talk about that. What are some stresses that Latino immigrants and their families in our communities face?
The fear of deportation.
Fear of deportation, right. And is that new? No, that is not new. It's, again, being talked about more. That is not new. That's something that people have been living with for a long time and experiencing for a long time. What else? I didn't hear that say louder.
Raids.
Raids, right. So ICE raids, so related to deportation, things that can happen at any time, at any place, that separates families and re-traumatizes people. What else?
Financial instability.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right.
Being fired if they report any kind of discrimination or abuse or mistreatment.
Right, so fear of recrimination if you use your voice, right? If you stand up for yourself and say, I don't think this is right, or I don't think this is fair, or somebody told me that I have a right to this. That even being empowered with the information doesn't do it if it's not safe to speak up. So we have untreated trauma in most cases. Very rarely do folks who are in our community now have had the experience of having trauma treated prior to arriving. Then during the journey there's additional trauma. And then when they get here, they've lost a lot. They've lost connections with family and friends where they live that were positive experiences. Many cultural traditions get lost along the way that are harder to reestablish here. Many of families use dialects that are not sort of pure Spanish, right? So they use they're using Spanish because they know that's what they have to use here, but they've lost the dialect that is how they think and how they feel and how they were raised. And even if they are, and there are many different versions of Spanish, right? There are different people from different countries where they may be able to communicate, but there are words that are so different that it feels every day like it's not quite their language. There are fears about asking for help and speaking up, and stigma, which everyone faces when you're asking for help, right? But for this community in particular, lots of real fear about what can happen if you ask for help or admit that you aren't strong, or admit that you made a mistake, or that something happened to you that is not your fault, but that you are just very scary to talk about. Also, shame is something that gets in the way of anybody and everybody asking for help. Limited access to culturally responsive services. We're going to talk more about what that means, but often people think about translation and interpretation of language, but not of culture. So there's not enough focus on cultural humility and things like we're doing today to really think about how we can be responsive, not just in a language way, but in a cultural way. And we have a political atmosphere that says, you don't belong and you're not welcome here, right? So this creates barriers. And and there are rivers and rocks, physical rivers and rocks that many of them have had to climb to get here, and then they experience other barriers when they arrive. What are some ways that language barriers limit access? School.
Employment.
Say another?
Employment.
Employment, right? Almost everything can be limited, right, if you have a language barrier. Almost everything is harder if you can't read or write or communicate in your community. So it's things that makes it harder that limit access to all of the services that are available. What about for people who are undocumented? What are some specific ways, some legal barriers that exist for them? Say it again?
Access to resources.
Some services are not available to people who are undocumented, right? What are some examples of those that others can access? Right, Medicaid, food stamps, right? Driver's license, huge, right? How about getting married? Can you get a marriage license? No.
Federal student aid.
Student aid, right, absolutely. You can get into a community college, but you can't get financial aid. So I just made a short list of things. So if most of the undocumented immigrants that I have worked with do drive, but they do not have the option of getting a driver's license, registering their car, or getting insurance. They can't. So every time they drive, they're taking a risk of getting pulled over and getting fined, or we've had families where the officer told them they had to walk home, they couldn't let them get back in the car. So that's big. That makes you realize every time somebody shows up for an appointment, comes to a parent event, they're taking that risk and we're deciding what's more important. I need to be there for that parent event that is voluntary, that most parents don't even go to. I'm going anyway, right? Even though it might happen that I'm going to go way out of my way. I'm not going to go on that street where I know the police might be. I'm going to go way out of my way. Yeah. Compounded is, someone mentioned economic stability. So these are just two examples of what we know in terms of statistics about North Carolina and the U.S. So the first one is children in poverty by race and ethnicity. And you can't see it well on the slide. By the way, you're going to get all of our slides in an email, so don't worry about that. You're going to get all of this to refer to later. The biggest slide here is Hispanic or Latino. So in 2016 in North Carolina, the greatest percentage of children in poverty were identified as either Hispanic or Latino. So again, those are the folks coming here to get a better life and are experiencing the highest rates of poverty for children in our state. And then the statistic is going in the wrong direction. Between 2016 and 2017, the poverty rate increased by more than a third for Hispanic infants. So that's specifically for children between the age of birth and 1. So that's like getting worse. That's like getting worse at a time when we hope things are getting better for people. So all of that was the downside, the hard stuff, the problem, which we can't ignore. We have to talk about it. But I can tell you that if you dwell on all of those things I just talked about, you will feel hopeless and you will be less resilient. So the rest of the time we're going to talk about solutions and resilience. But I think it's important to be moved by the powerfully hard stuff to be able to fully empathize and feel a level of compassion that we need to feel. Many people, when the beginning part of this presentation, will say, I don't want to hear about it, I can't talk about it, it's just too hard. And you guys may have had moments like that. So those are the times we need to be mindful and think about how to take care of ourselves. Because if we're going to help these vulnerable communities, we have to know how hard it is. We can't ignore the hard stuff. But we also have to always be brainstorming and solution focused. So, I love this picture. One of many that there are out there of family happiness and safety and togetherness. I thought it was a good image for resilience. There are many definitions of resilience, and I don't disagree with some of the others we have today. This one I thought was particularly strong, and it's from the American Psychological Association. Resilience is the process of adapting well in the face of adversity, trauma, tragedy, threats, or significant sources of stress. So thinking of that definition, what are some signs of resilience that you've seen in the Latino immigrant community?
They
business leaders, small businesses?
Right, so opening businesses in a community that it doesn't always feel safe in. That's an amazing thing to do. I couldn't open a small business on my own, I can tell you that. That is amazing to me that happens every day, that people have successful businesses, right? They start them, they keep them open in the face of so many challenges. What else?
Parents taking their kids to immigration court.
Absolutely, yeah.
I used to do house visits, and the way they carry themselves with their families, like the relationships with strong families that they have. Like you walk into their home knowing all their problems, but that home is like full of happiness.
Absolutely.
They offer anything and everything they have to you as a guest. It's amazing that they can do that.
Absolutely. Offering you food when there isn't enough, right? Right? Yes, I can't tell you the number of times I've had to say, no, thank you, no, thank you, thank you, but no, thank you, yes.
I think one of the gutsiest things I know of are documented people will own the car, many cars, with the insurance, with a little finger pointing to their friend who's undocumented. Do not drink and drive. To see that protection.
Right. That's an example of an informal network that has developed, right? Of a way to protect each other.
And a resilience.
Absolutely.
Throughout the entire community.
Absolutely. That's a wonderful example. Absolutely. And I hope one of the key things with resilience is we're not going to see it if we don't look for it. So if we're just looking for the adversity, we're going to see it, but we've got to dig deeper and look for the resilience. And then we've got to figure out how do we build on these strengths. So we have to be careful to not think we are the resilience and they just need to connect with us and then we'll make them resilient. They're already resilient. They wouldn't be here if they weren't resilient. So now how do we build on those strengths and not complicate things? Sometimes we try to add new ideas to people's plate when they just need to reinforce what they're already doing. So we have to be really careful about that. So let's talk about that. How many of you have seen this image before, or at least the first two slides, or two parts? Okay, so often it only has the equity part. So this is an emphasis on what ultimately we need to do. If we are going to make this community a resilient community, we need to do systems level change to reduce and eliminate barriers to access for everyone. But I really love this, the positive focus of the justice image, which is all three of these people can see the game without supports or accommodations because the causes of the inequity were addressed. The systemic barrier has been removed. We're not there yet, but if we don't have a vision of that's where we need to be, we're not going to get there. Because what happens in the middle when we focus on equity, which we need to, and sometimes the word equity, what we really mean is justice, right? Is that people start complaining that we're using too many resources for this short person in this image, right? Look at all those resources that person gets. We don't have enough money to afford that, so we got to take away one of those boxes. But if you're removing the systemic barrier, there's not extra resources for different people. We have removed the problem. And that's really hard to think about how to do, right? That's big picture thinking. But I think we're in a community that has the capacity to do that.
Ma'am, there's still a fence there.
There is a fence. This is a fence you can see through. So it's a fence to keep people safe, but to see through. So no fences is your vision of pure justice. Is no fence. Well, in this case, it's a soccer game, so I think there's a safety element. So it's thinking about the safety of the ball and the audience. But that's an important challenge to think about, right? Thank you for that. Okay, so I'm going to ask you guys to get woke with me for a minute. I hope you have all been a part of some sort of rally or advocacy movement to be a voice for a community that often is not comfortable coming forward and being a voice. So I'm going to ask you to do this with me. I've been to so many marches and been able to chant this with tens of thousands of people, and for me it's a way of staying strong in the face of adversity and feeling like a community with people who care and are compassionate and empathetic. So if you would repeat after me, and we're going to do refugees first and immigrants second, okay? So no hate,
no hate,
no fear,
no fear.
Refugees are welcome here.
Refugees are welcome here.
No hate,
no hate,
no fear,
no fear.
Immigrants are welcome here.
Immigrants are welcome here.
Okay, Okay, I can tell you if you've got the opportunity to do that over and over with tens of thousands of people, you walk away feeling stronger, right? You walk away feeling like, okay, we can do this. This is not going to be easy, but I got all these guys working with me across the country. So if you haven't had that experience of doing it with big groups, I encourage it. All right, so let's talk about the nitty-gritty of what we can do in this community every day to promote resilience in all of the vulnerable communities that are our neighbors. We first have to be hopeful ourselves. We have to be noticing and celebrating the good stuff. We have to talk about it. We have to talk about the resilience and the signs of resilience in ourselves, in our workplace, in our coworkers, and in our communities. Be a learner. You wouldn't be here if you're not a learner. Or you'd be doing something else on your phone and not paying attention, but be here. You're here because you want to learn more. And part of being culturally humble is knowing that you're never done with that, right? There's always more we can learn. So learning about all 4 of these bullets is a way to continue this work for yourself professionally and hopefully personally as well. How many of you have seen the film Resilience? All right. We're going to be, I'm also one of the co-leaders of the Orange Resilience Initiative, and we're using that film to talk about ACEs science, Sarah talked about, to think about how we can move forward in communities around being trauma-informed and being resilience-focused and resilience-driven. So if you haven't had the chance to see it, I highly recommend it, and you'll be getting emails because you came here today about future opportunities to see the film. Understanding protective factors. How many of you have heard that phrase, protective factors? Ooh, not enough. Okay. These are the protective factors. So what the protective factors are factors that have been proven over and over and over again to be what we need to grow in people for them to be resilient. For families to be strong, they need to have these 5 protective factors. The first one is parental resilience. So children need their parents to be strong in order to be resilient themselves. And one of the bullets under that, I don't know if you can read it, is honoring each family's race, language, culture, history, and approach to parenting. That's very important when we're doing parenting work, which I've done most of my career, is that we're doing that in a culturally responsive and culturally humble way, right? There's no one way to parent effectively. And sometimes we get caught up in the white American way of parenting and turn people off from the beginning when we're trying to improve their parenting skills. Social connections is one of the most powerful protective factors that we don't do as much about. So those are not professional connections. Those are the social connections, and you guys gave examples of those in your examples of resilience. Social connections that people have with others in their community that are there for them when they age out of a program or when they move to another county and they no longer can get that service. Those folks are still there. So we need to remember those social networks that we often neglect to ask about or to reinforce when we're working with families as professionals. So if you don't already know about the protective factors, please educate yourself around them. They're one of the links. You got an amazing resource list from this group, and I hope you follow at least 5 of them to learn more. But one of them is about the Strengthening Families framework, and there's a free 13-hour online training that anyone can do. I highly recommend it as an orientation for new staff to learn more about protective factors. Trauma-informed systems. So let's think about how we can reflect on our own organizations and move us all forward. So we got to start like you're starting today, as thinking about the specific unique challenges that each vulnerable population faces, but always in doing that, highlighting resilience. So we have to always be pairing the challenges with resilience. And then really think about your organization's policies and procedures. That's a great place to start. Whether you're in a leadership role or not, I'm sure you have come across a policy or procedure where it feels like that's not really fair, or that's not really working for this community, and wondered if there's a way it could change. It's not going to change if you don't bring that up. So I would encourage you to say it. Say, I'm wondering if this form could be done differently. One of the examples is often we translate things in a level of Spanish that is not what people use, right? So we have to be, and using Google Translate, don't do it. Just don't do it. I know it's tempting, and maybe it's better than nothing if you're in an emergency situation, but we've got to get better at really thinking about what we translate and how we translate, what words we use. Thinking about, does this policy or procedure actively promote racial and immigrant equity? So that's very different than just, does it cause is it fair? Is it doing something to promote equity and justice? That's a step farther. Does this policy or procedure promote a sense of belonging in our community or not? Does it prevent adverse childhood experiences that Sarah talked about? Does it promote protective factors? So really looking at, and on the Strengthening Families website, there's a zillion different self-assessment tools that you can use to do just this, to really reflect on, is my organization doing enough to promote resilience with the families and children we serve? What are some examples that some of you have made of changes or has been made in your organization that felt like a step in the right direction, of a change in policy or procedure that was going in the right direction? I know you have examples. Yeah.
Dual language. Having dual language schools.
Dual language schools, and we have 2 now, is that right?
Yeah.
Or 3? Okay. Right, so this is a community that is committed to having dual language opportunities where children are learning in school every day in more than one language. That is a powerful step forward in creating a resilient community that connects people across language barriers and creates stronger brains and more resilient kids and families. Absolutely, a great example. There are big things like that. There are small things as well. So thinking about one of the changes that we have made at different organizations is thinking about the time spent on translating things. Hillary mentioned that. We spend a lot of money and time on translating things that nobody reads and are too many words. And we need to know the literacy level of the populations we serve, but almost always it's better to spend that money with a phone call or a face-to-face conversation or having a bilingual staff person at the front desk, or trilingual or quadringual, or having more access to interpreters rather than translating all that stuff. I just got an email the other day from a PTA person in Durham who said, we want to translate all of our newsletters that all the teachers do because we really want to be inclusive of all of our Latino community. So do you know of any volunteers who could help us with that? And I said, if you got volunteers, what they could do is create relationships and build community with the Latino community. Don't waste your time on translating every teacher newsletter. And a lot of teachers use Google Translate for newsletters. So that's a very common practice, and really what our recommendation would be is save that time for face-to-face and phone calls and relationships. It's much more powerful than pieces of paper. So that's an example of a policy or procedure change.
At the middle schools, they have parent ambassadors who are the face of a group that act as the liaisons between what is the information that's coming from the school to then go out to that family community, and it's someone who is of that community.
Is that a volunteer position?
It is a volunteer position, yeah. So they have regular meetings with administration, and then they can take things back.
Right.
Instead of the translating.
Great, that's a great example. And is that just one school, or do you say the middle schools?
I feel like that's in the middle schools at all of the Chapel Hill middle schools, but definitely at McDougal middle.
Okay, cool. So one of the things that can happen in school, my husband teaches kindergarten, is one school or one grade level can make a great decision and start doing something like that, but it doesn't become a system-wide practice. So what we want to do is elevate those cool ideas that people are doing that are innovative and that are working and say, let's make this more places. Let's make this is our policy now. Instead of, that's a cool thing that she does, but that's because she likes to. So we've got to get better at elevating stuff like that. So thank you. That's a great example of how we can start to institutionalize some of these things that are using peer support instead of professionalizing everything. So sometimes it's not about money. It's about elevating somebody who's great at it and does it anyway, and helping them to do it for the organization that wants to connect with parents. Other recommendations for eliminating barriers, and I use the term Spanish speaking a lot as my most general term to describe the communities that I've worked with who are Latino. One of the things we have to be careful about is assuming about a population of folks. So thinking about how long they've been here, what's their level of acculturation, what generation are they, and not making assumptions, asking questions. So knowing, asking how well they communicate in Spanish and English, how well they read Spanish, asking the right questions so that we are not making assumptions and building policy and procedure based on assumptions. Thinking about what countries they came from. Many times you won't know that unless you ask. So really knowing how different countries are, that just because they speak Spanish doesn't mean they feel like a member of a community with the person who lives next door to them who speaks Spanish, because they're from two different countries and very different parts of those countries. Learning about the organizations and groups that they have formed. So these amazing, there's dance troupes and food organized groups that are don't even have names sometimes, but they are powerful and they are something we can learn from. And they often will, Isla is another example of a wonderful program that is underrated and not known enough about. So there's some powerful things in our community that we can be supporting and learning from and building out our connections to, building bridges with. There are also, and I hope many of you are those people, service providers who are trusted. And those are folks we can learn a lot from, and we need to pay them better and elevate them as leaders in our community, because they have figured something out. They've figured out how to build trust, and they are often hunkering down, doing the best they can with that trust and feeling isolated. So reaching out, finding out who they are. You can ask the question, who do you trust when you need to ask, when you want help? Who do you go to? Finding that out and then building connections with that organization or that person. Often that's someone in the faith community, and often as professionals we're not as good as we should be at connecting with the faith community, so thinking about who's out there who's already earned the trust and how can we help them use that trust to build resilience.
Just being really vulnerable and transparent, having a person to stand in the gap before, and I've experienced resentment from the other party. Why are you giving them a voice? It's resentment and opposition because they don't want them to have a voice at all. And when you're a person that stands in that gap, you experience, you see the hatred and you see just the blocks that people put up. And you don't always have the control or the power. And then you have to relay that message as well.
Right, that's the serenity prayer is good for those moments, right? Accept the things we cannot change, and knowing the wisdom, there is so much we can change. There's some things we can't, but there's always more that we can than we can't. So recognizing when we have to say, okay, I'm gonna let that go because I'm gonna go over here where I have influence and I can make an impact, right? Absolutely, thank you for sharing that.
Also for allow them to feel safety if we're providing any public service. I think creating a space where they can share their information without thinking that it's overheard by somebody else, it's very important. If you don't have an intake lobby or cubicle where it's personalized, you have to reinforce where the information is going to be shared, why you're asking them the questions, and be attentive that to them, somebody else hearing their information may mean a lot, especially if they're undocumented.
Absolutely, absolutely. As helpers, we're often looking for every opportunity. Oh, let me help you. Let's talk about this right here. And we're able to ignore what's going on around them. They are not able to. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. That's wonderful advice. And that's really hard in many of our settings, right? You're just trying to catch somebody. So you're in a hallway in a school, or you're in a parking lot or somewhere where you feel safe. But we're always questioning, is this a safe? Or asking. I love the question that Marla said that she asked. Really asking, is this okay? Is this a good time to talk? Is this a good thing? Is this a safe conversation to have now? Thank you. So the last bullet here you're doing today, and I hope you'll continue to do, to reach out and build connections with organizations that have strengths that yours may not, and just to work together to avoid the dangers of isolation. Thinking about your staffing, how well does your staff reflect the demographics of the folks that you serve? Thinking about bilingual and also bicultural. How much have you done to make the positions in your organization truly open to the people that you serve? Have you created opportunities for people without as much education to work in your organization? Have you created paraprofessional levels that make it possible for people to be a part of your organization? Or ways for them to be a part without having a payroll or being employed in a more traditional way, things like gift cards for their time and things like that are more creative ways without having to put somebody on a payroll. We need bilingual personnel. We need to cultivate bilingualism, so things like having dual language schools is a wonderful way to do that. We've got to make it easy for people to become bilingual and stay bilingual. I can't tell you how many people I've talked to who are like, well, yeah, I was bilingual at one point, but I haven't really kept it up. We've got to make it easy for people to keep up those skills. We need so badly in all of the work we do, we need more bilingual folks. And we've got to take care of them. We have to make their jobs doable. Often there are two people doing the same job, one of them's bilingual and one of them's not, and the bilingual person always has twice as much work to do because everything they do has to be translated and interpreted, and it's a different job. But we don't pay for it differently often, and we don't train for it differently often, and often the leadership in the organization doesn't really get that. So we've got to really listen to those folks and ask them, what makes your job challenging? How can we make it easier? And really think about that bilingualism is a skill that needs to be cultivated and developed and taken care of. Think about your messaging. Think about your website, your pieces of paper, your waiting rooms, your self when you're interacting with people, and how you may have described things that put people off. One of the best examples I know of is things that require a W-2. If you have to, for eligibility, you have to bring in a W-2. If you have never gotten a W-2 or been able to do your taxes because you were undocumented, then that tells me, okay, I'm not going to be able to do that. In many cases, we have alternatives to those kind of eligibility requirements, but we're not making that clear. So one of the things that's been recommended to me is to say very clearly, if proof of citizenship or social security number is not required, say that. Don't assume people will figure that out. Don't just say, or other things. Like, make it clear, make it explicit that you are welcome here. We do not discriminate against people who are undocumented. There are many services that it's not possible for them to receive, and we want them to know that as well. But there are many more where it's not clear on the messaging that they are eligible. Also be careful of our language. Often people don't know that illegal is not the right term to use. Illegal alien is something I never say about a person, but I know people who mean well who have used that term because they didn't know that it wasn't okay. So undocumented is the term that I use, and I encourage you to really think and talk to the community that you work with and find out what terms work best. The other thing we sometimes say is resident. Resident has a status, right? But if we say community member or neighbor, that doesn't define your status in any kind of legal way. So thinking about what language we use when we're talking about our community. Also just generally thinking about literacy levels. We often have too much on a page, or we have Spanish and English on the same page. If your literacy level is low in Spanish, having English and Spanish back to back on top of each other just makes it harder. So we use big words, we use terms that mean something to us and not to others, and it's very intimidating and turns people off. So we've really got to get better at that, or having people help them fill them out instead of handing them to people to fill out. People generally with low literacy do not say, I can't read that. I can tell you that's extremely rare. So they're going to nod their head, they're going to imply that they understood it, but I see a lot of heads shaking. So I always say, assume people can't read until proven otherwise instead of the other way around. Stop assuming that they can. You will always be better off. And people will be so grateful for you to acknowledge that it's hard for them and to help them with it. Can you think of an example of an eligibility requirement that you have experienced that kind of created a barrier? And be careful not to call somebody out.
Well,
Len.
One thing I think of is the charity care application with UNC that it asks for a social security number, but that's not a requirement. So we at our clinics, we help a lot of patients fill out charity care applications, and I try to be mindful of saying, I ask if they have one, but I say it's not a requirement. I try to explain as I go through the form, this is why I'm asking you this, it's not a requirement, you know, this and that, and try to create a more comfortable conversation.
Great. That's an example of if we can make a systemic change where we can change the actual form, we would not need that kind of extra step, right? In the interest of time, I know there are many more examples, but I'm going to ask you to think about the examples that you're thinking in your head. See who you can talk to about that. Think about setting a goal for yourself of, I want to change that. Because it can happen if you speak up about it and push for it. Self-care is something that we have to get good at if we're going to stay in this work. We can't afford for any one of you to get burnt out and turn over and do something else. We need you. So in order to keep you, and to keep your own mental health, you've got to get good at taking care of yourself. So in order to do that, we've got to be careful about teaching other people to do things that we're not doing for ourselves. So always start with you. Am I getting enough sleep? Am I eating well? Am I exercising? Those sound like things you hear all the time, but really, are you? How many people in this room get good sleep on a regular basis? Okay, all right. That's the place to start. Nobody's brain works well when it's not gotten enough sleep. Maintain boundaries. This work is so difficult, and it's very easy to start saying, let me just give you a ride. Let me just give you $5. Let me just keep your kid for the weekend. I know that'll help you out the most. Be careful. Have clear boundaries and maintain them. They need to be compassionate boundaries. So you're listening, you're learning, you're connecting, but you're not losing yourself in the clients that you serve. And ask for help. Build your network is something that I hope you've done today. There's some great conversation happening. I mentioned the La Mesita network as a way to be a part of a statewide network. Lots of the examples on your handouts will give you more places to connect with. Is anybody here from Orange County Rape Crisis? Yes. Yay! Thank you for being here. I haven't met you, but I'm looking forward to it. So I'm highlighting Orange County Rape Crisis because I think it's an undervalued, underappreciated nonprofit in our community, and they do wonderful work with the Latino community and have built some of that trust around a very intense traumatic experience, which is incredibly difficult to do, and I applaud Rape Crisis for doing that. So this is directly from their website. You can go and look more yourself. They'll give you more information about how to connect more with them if you haven't already. In particular, how many of you have had the Stewards of Children training? Okay, a few. That's a challenge I'm going to give you to do for yourself, to improve your capacity to prevent one of the most powerful traumatic experiences that a child can have, which is child sexual abuse. It's something people don't want to talk about, and because we're not talking about it, it's happening way more than you can imagine. So taking this 2-hour course is free, and it's a way to empower yourself to protect children. And it's an evidence-based model that Orange County Rape Crisis Center is funded to provide, but I'm a trained facilitator. All of us who are facilitators will do it for free as volunteers. So all you gotta do is ask, and we will come and provide this training for your staff, for your community. It can be provided in Spanish or English, and I highly recommend it. Build your network by joining La Mesita, by connecting. La Mesita also, we have monthly webinars that are free, and if you do them in real time, you can get continuing ed credits, but you can watch them anytime. They're available on the network. One of the things we were talking about is medication. The last webinar we did was with Luke Smith, who is our executive director, about ADHD and diagnosing it in the Latino community and treating it in the Latino community. We have one about intimate partner violence, early childhood mental health, all with a focus on the Latino community. So I hope you'll check those out. In the future, you can register for them, but again, they're all sitting there waiting for you to watch. These are some other examples of things you can do. And to educate yourself more, these are the things. Joining the Resilience Initiative is another way to be a part of general resilience in our community. So these are just some action steps I recommend as we move into talking about action, which I think is our next thing. Thank you all.
Great. Wonderful. Thank you so much, Ennis. Lynn and I were just chatting on the side because time is getting away from us, and we got some wonderful questions here. I wish we had time to present all of them and answer them. So we decided we were going to select one of those so that we can address it, and then. The last part with the action steps will kind of leave you with some ideas about action steps, and then on your evaluation before you leave it encourages you to think about at least one action step you could take after today. So we'll refer to that just in a second. But this one we picked, it's kind of a two-part, but can you discuss your experience with refugees and/or immigrants where their identity intersects with other minority groups? For example, an immigrant who is also a member of a gender, sexual identity minority. How do you effectively address the intersectionality of an individual with trauma? Awesome question.
Does anybody want to tackle that? It's pretty. How do you effectively address the intersectionality of an individual with trauma?
I can't speak to that question, but our webinar coming up in February is about that topic. Yeah, so
I'm sorry, it's the last, if you're on the network, you'll find out for sure what it is, but it will be in February. It's free. It'll be a 1 hour with particularly focus on that topic by an expert in that area, which I am not. But that is another example of compounding vulnerabilities that is very important to be aware of and ask good questions about and not make assumptions about.
Recognizing multiple identities, and I mean, just that's all I would say. Just the basic, recognizing that someone is, we're not just calling someone an immigrant or Latinx or a refugee. All of us have multiple identities. So, encouraging ways to express, all of the pieces of ourselves. I think that's very basic to a complex question, though. So.
Great, and I will. I've been making notes too to kind of take back to our coalitions and. One that I feel like I've heard and was also in this other question here had to do with kind of racial concordance and building trust and sort of addressing our racial identities in terms of how we're going about this work. And we try to give a little bit of a disclaimer or acknowledgement rather at the beginning about those of us who are, been participating in this work and presenting today. But as others have said, this is a journey, so we will continue that journey and look for ways to continue to question ourselves, explore, learn, and keep working towards equity. So Lynn and I wanted to share really quick, kind of here lastly, a slide that was wherever Marlo went. Marlo shared this wonderful slide with us. There you are. On the R's, she referenced that earlier of the R's of trauma-informed care and resilience. The 4 R's being realize, resist, recognize, respond. Also here are some of the key principles of safety, trust, choice, collaboration, empowerment. On each of your chairs are some examples of kind of how you could take this kind of what we've discussed today, take it back to your workplaces, to your agencies, to your communities, and to yourself to start thinking about ways that we can work in a more trauma-informed, resilience-focused, healing-focused way. So again, I want to thank you all so much for coming today. I want to give another round of applause to our speakers. I want to encourage us to continue to be connected. I know many of us are already connected to each other. I am thankful for all the work that you all do and the way that we collaborate together, and that's the way we can gain our strength and do a better job. So I look forward to continued connections and opportunities together. Thank you all so much. Enjoy your meeting.